I was sipping a pina colada on a beach in the Maldives when my phone started blowing up. 47 missed calls, 63 text messages, all from the same people who had just told me I wasn't welcome at my sister's wedding. You see, I had just paid for that wedding $100,000. My final transfer, the cherry, on top of a wildly expensive cake I had been funding for 2 years, totaling $250,000. Period. Then the message that changed everything arrived. The family doesn't want you there. Watch online. It wasn't an un-invitation, it wasn't an apology. Just watch online. As if I were a distant acquaintance, a stranger who hadn't just bankrolled their entire fairy tale. Period. I stared at that message for exactly 10 seconds. Then I replied, "Of course I hope it's a memorable day." And I meant it, period, because what my family didn't know, what my whiny, manipulative little sister and my guilt-tripping mother had no idea, was that I had read every clause of that wedding contract, every single word, period. So while they were panicking on what should have been the happiest day of Hazel's life, I was 9,000 miles away watching their perfect wedding implode in real time on a live stream I never planned on missing, period. My phone wouldn't stop ringing. I kept ignoring it because this story isn't about a wedding. It's about what happens when the family scapegoat finally stops playing the game, period. When the sister who always sacrifices everything decides to sacrifice nothing. And believe me, when this is over, you'll understand why revenge is a dish best served with a beach umbrella and an ocean view. Let me take you back to where it all began. My name is Natalie Carter. I'm 34 years old, and for the last 12 years, I've worked as a senior financial analyst at a consulting firm in Boston. I'm the person companies call when they need someone to find the numbers that don't add up, to spot the patterns everyone else missed, period. I've always been good with details, good at seeing what's really there beneath the surface. I just never thought I'd have to use those skills on my own family, period. The wire transfer confirmation flashed on my screen at 2:47 p.m. on a Tuesday. 100,000 US dollars, irreversible. Final, period. I stared at the screen until the numbers blurred. Then I closed my laptop and leaned back in my office chair, a cold feeling creeping up my spine. Period. And that was it. The final payment. For the last 2 years, I had made transfers, written checks, and sent wire payments totaling $250,000 out for my sister Hazel's wedding. $250,000, period, the bulk of my life savings gone invested in a day that was supposed to be perfect for her. I told myself it was worth it. Period. Hazel was my little sister, 28, sweet, and always a little helpless when it came to practical matters, period. When she came to me 18 months ago, crying about how she and Jacob wanted a beautiful wedding but couldn't afford it, I felt that familiar pull, that big sister instinct that had been drilled into me since I was 6 years old, period. And my mother first placed little Hazel in my arms and said, "You have to take care of her now." I remembered that conversation so clearly. Period. Hazel sat on my couch, mascara running down her cheeks, and explained that Jacob came from a wealthy family, but they were old-fashioned about money. Period. They wouldn't help pay for the wedding until after it happened, a sort of test to see if Hazel was marrying him for the right reasons. Period. It sounded strange to me even then, but Hazel was so desperate, so heartbroken at the thought of a courthouse wedding when she had dreamed of something beautiful her whole life. "I'll pay you back," she promised, squeezing my hands. "I swear, Nat, the minute Jacob's family signs the check after the wedding, every penny will be back in your account, with interest. I promise." I believed her. Or maybe I just wanted to believe her so badly that I ignored the little voice in my head, asking why Jacob's supposedly wealthy family couldn't just pay for it up front. Period. My phone buzzed on my desk. A text message. I picked it up, half expecting a thank you from Hazel, a confirmation that the final payment had gone through. Period. Instead, I saw my mother's name, Linda Carter. The message was short, brutally short. The family doesn't want you there. Watch online. I read it 3 times before the words truly sank in. Then I read it again. Sure, I must have misunderstood period, but no. There it was. Black text on a white screen, clinical, cold, final. Period. I was uninvited from my own sister's wedding, the wedding I had just finished paying for. My hands started to shake, and I had to put the phone down on the desk before I dropped it. I stood up, walked to my office door, closed it, and locked it. Then I walked back to my desk and sat down very carefully, as if I were made of something fragile that might shatter. Period. I picked up my phone again and scrolled through my message history with my mother and with Hazel, looking for something I'd missed. Some argument, some offense I'd committed that would warrant this. Period. What I found was a pattern I had been too close to see. 2 months ago, Hazel had stopped answering my questions about the wedding timeline. Period. I asked when the bridal shower was, and she said she'd let me know. She never did. I found out later from a cousin's Instagram post that it had happened the weekend before. Hazel mum and 12 of Hazel's friends at a wine bar downtown. I hadn't been invited. I told myself it was an oversight, a miscommunication. Period. 6 weeks ago, I asked about the bridesmaid dress fittings. My mother told me they were still finalizing the schedule and would update me soon. Period. 2 weeks later, I checked Hazel's social media and saw pictures of her and 4 bridesmaids in matching lilac gowns. Champagne glasses raised with the caption, "My I Do crew is a success, period." I wasn't in the picture. I told myself maybe I just wasn't a bridesmaid. That was fine. Hazel had her own friends. I was just the sister, just the bank, apparently, period. 4 weeks ago, I asked my mum for the final guest count so I could authorize the last payment to the venue. She was vague. "Still finalizing things, sweetie, you know how these things are." I had approved the payment anyway because the venue needed confirmation. Now I understood. They were finalizing how to cut me out while still taking my money. Period. I opened my desk drawer and pulled out the wedding invitation that had arrived at my apartment 3 months earlier. Ivory cardstock, elegant script. Hazel and Jacob's names embossed in gold foil. Period. I had kept it on my desk as a reminder of what I was working toward, what I was sacrificing for. I picked up a pen and wrote across the bottom in firm, clear letters, "Paid in full by the uninvited." Period. Then I just sat there, staring at those words, feeling something shift inside me. The hurt was there, yes, raw and searing, but underneath it, something else was rising up. Something cold and clear and precise. I had spent my entire career finding the truth in numbers, spotting the discrepancies, seeing what didn't add up. I was trained to think 3 steps ahead, to plan for contingencies, and to protect assets, period. And months ago, when something about this whole arrangement started to feel wrong, when my gut started whispering warnings I didn't want to hear, I had done something I never told Hazel or my mother. I had protected myself. Period. I opened my laptop and navigated to a folder I'd created back in March. The label read, Plan B, Contingency Protocol. Inside were contracts, correspondence, payment structures, every receipt, every wire transfer confirmation, every email where Hazel had promised reimbursement. Period. And one particular document that I had asked my lawyer friend Rachel to review and notarize. A wedding sponsorship agreement with very specific clauses about payment conditions and guest list confirmations. Period clauses my mother had signed without reading 6 months ago, when I told her the venue required formal documentation for large payments, period clauses that included a very important provision about what would happen if the principal financial sponsor were removed from the guest list. period. I clicked open the file and began to read for the first time since I'd gotten that text message. I smiled, period. They wanted me to watch online. Oh, I'd be watching from somewhere much nicer than Boston. And they were about to find out that the sister they had always underestimated had been paying attention the whole time period. I spent the next hour methodically going through that folder, reviewing every document with the same careful attention I would give a client audit. The wedding sponsorship agreement was at the top of the pile, and I read it again, my highlighter marking the clauses that mattered most. Section 4.2. Completion payment is contingent upon sponsor's confirmed attendance. Section 7.1. Guest list verification required 48 hours prior to final payment release. Period. My lawyer friend Rachel had looked at me like I was paranoid when I asked her to draft this 6 months ago, but she'd done it anyway. Just protecting your investment, she'd said. I'd nodded, not wanting to admit even to myself that I was protecting myself from my own family, period. I pulled my suitcase out of the closet and started packing. Not with the haste of someone running away, but with the focused purpose of someone who had planned for this possibility. Period. Swimsuits, sundresses, the linen pants I'd bought last summer, and never had a chance to wear a wide-brimmed hat, my favorite sandals. Period. I folded each item carefully, just as I had the notarized contract that went into a waterproof document folder, which I tucked into the inner pocket of my carry-on bag. Period. I wasn't sure if I'd need the physical copy, but old habits die hard. Always have the supporting documentation. Period. My phone rang as I was zipping the suitcase shut. Mum? Of course. I let it ring 4 times before I answered. Let her wait. Let her wonder. Natalie. Her voice had that peculiar tone she used when she was about to justify something awful, part Tylenol PM, part condescension. I know you got my message. Yes, I replied, continuing to pack my toiletry bag with one hand. Toothbrush, sunscreen, the expensive face cream I never let myself use because I was always saving money for something for someone else. I need you to understand that this is for the best. It's Hazel's day, and you know how she gets when she feels overshadowed. You've always been so successful, so accomplished. It makes her feel inadequate. We just thought it would be easier if you watched from home. You can still be a part of it. I stopped moving. I just stood there in my bathroom phone pressed to my ear, listening to my mother explain how my success, my hard work, my achievements were somehow a burden on my sister. The sister to whom I had just given $250,000. Mum, I said, my voice perfectly calm. I hope you saved all the receipts. You're going to need them. There was a pause. What receipts, Natalie? What are you talking about? All of them. Every vendor payment, every deposit, every contract. You're going to want to have everything organized and accessible. I don't understand. Why would I need? You will, I said. Enjoy the wedding, Mum. I hung up before she could reply. My hands weren't shaking anymore. How interesting. Something had shifted in the last hour, a fundamental recalibration of who I was willing to be, period. The dutiful daughter was dead. The woman who was left was someone new. Someone who'd been waiting underneath all along, period. I opened my laptop, opened my email, and navigated to the sent folder. 2 weeks earlier, I had written to the event coordinator a simple professional inquiry. Hi, Jennifer. Just confirming the final guest list for the Carter Morrison wedding on June 15th. As the principal financial sponsor, I'd like to verify all attendees before authorizing the final payment of $170,000. Could you please send me the confirmed list at your earliest convenience? The contract specifies this verification must occur 48 hours before final payment release. Thank you, Natalie Carter. Jennifer had replied within a few hours with an attached spreadsheet. I had opened it, scanned the alphabetical list of names, and found exactly what I suspected I would find. Period. My name wasn't there. It had never been there. Period. I forwarded the email to Rachel immediately with a single line, Clause 4.2 has been triggered. Her reply was equally brief. Standing by. Let me know when you want to proceed. I looked at that email exchange now, and something that felt almost like satisfaction settled in my chest. Period. I had asked the right questions. I had documented everything. I had protected myself in the only way I knew how, with paperwork and evidence and inflexible legal language. Period. I grabbed a notepad from my desk drawer and wrote in clear, measured handwriting, Enjoy the wedding. I'm done cleaning up your messes. Left the note on the kitchen counter, propped against the coffee maker where I knew my mother would see it when she came by to water my plants while I was away. Period. She had a key. She'd always had a key. Another thing I would need to change when I got back. Period. My flight to the Maldives left in 6 hours. I had booked it 3 weeks ago, right after I got the email from Jennifer with the guest list, a plan B, and an escape route rolled into one. The resort cost more than I would normally allow myself to spend, but I figured if I was right about what was coming, I deserved something beautiful. Period. And if I was wrong, if this had all somehow been a misunderstanding, I'd still have a much-needed vacation. Period. But I wasn't wrong. I knew my family too well. I had spent 34 years learning their patterns, anticipating their needs, sacrificing my own comfort for theirs. Period. I knew exactly how this was going to play out. Period. I opened a new email window and typed in an address I had created specifically for this situation, an encrypted email service Rachel had recommended. Period. The recipient was listed simply as Legal Team Carter Case. The subject line took me a moment to write. It needed to be clear, professional, and final. Phase 1 complete, monitoring active. The body of the email was longer. It outlined the timeline, the exclusion from the guest list, the text from my mother, the contract clauses that had been breached, and the payment structure that was about to become very relevant. Period. I attached scanned copies of every document, every receipt, all the correspondence. Period. Then I wrote the final paragraph. I will be out of the country for the next 10 days. I will not be taking calls from family members. The wedding is scheduled for June 15th at 4 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. As per the contract, the venue will attempt to process the $170,000 payment at 2 p.m. on that day. When I woke up, the sun was setting, painting the sky in colors I didn't know the names of. I showered, changed into a loose cotton dress, and made my way to the resort's infinity pool as the last rays of sunlight faded into stars. Period. That's where I met Helen. She was sitting in one of the shallow lounge chairs built into the pool, a book resting on the watery edge beside her, a glass of white wine in her hand. Period. She had short, elegant white hair, sun-weathered skin that spoke of a life lived outdoors, and piercing blue eyes that seemed to take everything in. Period. She looked up as I waded into the water, and something in her expression told me she was more than just a weary tourist looking for relaxation. First time in the Maldives? She asked, her voice warm with an accent I couldn't quite place. Midwestern, maybe, but educated. First time in a place like this, I admitted, settling onto a lounger a respectful distance away. I'm not usually a do-nothing kind of person. Ah, she smiled. And it wasn't a pitying smile, just an understanding one. Running away from something or running towards something. The question caught me off guard. I had been expecting small talk about the weather, the resort, the usual tourist amenities. Instead, she had gone straight to the heart of something I wasn't sure I wanted to examine. "I'm not sure there's a difference," I said carefully. "Oh, there's always a difference." She took a sip of wine, her gaze drifting out to where the pool seemed to merge with the ocean. "I was a family law attorney for 40 years, retired 5 years ago. I've seen every variation of running you can imagine." Something about her directness made me want to be honest. Both, then. Running away from something and running toward myself, if that makes any sense. Perfect sense. She said it like I'd answered a test question correctly. The best journeys usually are. We sat in comfortable silence for a while, the warm water swirling around us, the sound of small waves lapping at the pool's edge. Period. Then Helen spoke again. "If I'm prying, tell me to shut up. But I once represented a woman who sued her family for financial exploitation. Her parents, 2 brothers, and an uncle. They'd been bleeding her dry for years, using her credit, forging her signature, the whole terrible catalogue of familial theft." Helen's fingers traced patterns on the water's surface. "We won. $2 million in damages and restitution. She got back every penny she was owed." I leaned forward, slightly engrossed in the story. "But," I asked because I could hear the unspoken word hanging in the air. "But she lost everyone. Every single person in her family cut her off. They told friends she was vengeful and cruel. She was right, and she was legally entitled to that money. But the cost was complete isolation from everyone she'd known since birth." Helen looked at me then directly. Years later, she told me she'd do it all again, that the freedom was worth the loneliness. But I always wondered if that was true, or if it was just what she needed to believe to live with her choice. My throat felt tight. "Why are you telling me this?" "Because you have that look," Helen said gently. "The look of someone who's about to burn something down, and I wanted you to know what fire costs before you light the match." I thought about the contract sitting in my bungalow, the email I'd sent to Rachel. The payment that would fail in less than 48 hours. The sister who would be left at the altar in a dress I bought in front of guests I'd paid to feed, and would discover that I wasn't as powerless as she assumed. "What if they've already burned everything down?" I asked quietly. "And I'm just walking away from the ashes?" Helen considered that and nodded slowly. "Then you're not running away. You're just refusing to rebuild something that was never meant to stand in the first place." We talked for another hour, as the stars came out in full force above us, more stars than I'd ever seen in the polluted Boston sky. Helen told me about her grandkids, her late husband, the cases that kept her up at night, and the ones that restored her faith in people. I told her about my job, the satisfaction of finding truth in numbers, about how I'd always been good at seeing patterns, except when it came to my own life. When we finally got out of the pool, she touched my arm briefly. "Whatever happens," she said, "make sure you're choosing, not just reacting. There's power in the choice." I went back to my bungalow and sat on the deck, my feet dangling over the water. I picked up my phone and stared at it for a long moment. Period. 17 missed calls, 43 text messages. I didn't read a single one. Period. Instead, I put the phone on silent. No vibrate, no sound. Everything muted except for the one app I had downloaded specifically for this trip. The livestream app that would broadcast Hazel's wedding to guests and family who couldn't attend family like me. I left the app open ready and placed the phone screen down on the deck beside me. Period. Tomorrow was the wedding. Tomorrow, everything I had carefully constructed would either prove me right or reveal me to be paranoid and vengeful. Period. Tomorrow I would find out if my family would finally see me as something more than their personal bank account. Tonight I sat under stars. My sister would never see, listening to the water lap against the stilts of my bungalow, breathing in air that tasted like freedom period. My phone buzzed once against the wooden deck. I picked it up and saw the notification. The wedding ceremony will begin in 10 minutes. I went to the small bar and made myself a drink. Something tropical and ridiculous with too much rum and a paper umbrella. Then I went back out to the deck, settled into the cushioned lounge chair, and opened the live stream. Period. The screen filled with a picture of white chairs arranged in perfect rows, an archway covered in flowers I recognized because I'd approved the florist's invoice, and guests in expensive-looking clothes taking their seats. Period. I took a long sip of my drink and waited for the show to begin. Period. The quality of the live stream was surprisingly good. High-definition multiple camera angles, a professional setup. I guess that made sense, considering how much I paid for the videography package. Period. The irony was not lost on me as I watched the guests mill into their seats, women in pastel dresses and men in summer suits, all smiling and chatting as if this were just another beautiful wedding on a perfect June afternoon. A string quartet began to play something classical and romantic, which I recognized from the music selection list Hazel had sent me 8 months ago, back when I was still part of the planning discussions. Period, back when my opinion mattered, because my money mattered. Period. The camera panned over the flower arrangements, acres of white roses and peonies, each one costing more than most people spend on groceries in a month. I had approved those invoices too. Period. The procession began. Bridesmaids in lilac drifted down the aisle, in pairs, faces I recognized from Hazel's Instagram, but had never met in person. Period. Then the music swelled to something grander and everyone stood. The camera focused on the entrance, and there was my sister. Period. Hazel looked beautiful, I had to give her that. The dress was spectacular, all lace and silk and tiny crystals that caught the light. Period. Her hair was swept into an elaborate updo that probably took hours, and she was already crying those delicate, picture-perfect tears that somehow didn't smudge her makeup. Period. She looked like a bridal magazine cover come to life as she walked toward Jacob, who stood at the altar in a tuxedo, looking appropriately awestruck. Period. I took another sip of my drink and waited. The ceremony proceeded exactly as planned. The officiant welcomed everyone, made a few remarks about love and commitment, the usual beautiful sentiments that felt hollow, when I knew what I knew about how we'd gotten here. Jacob and Hazel faced each other, holding hands, gazing into each other's eyes, with an intensity that might have moved me if I hadn't paid $250,000 to be prevented from witnessing it in person. Then, just as the officiant opened his mouth to begin the vows, I saw movement at the edge of the frame. A woman in a black suit was walking briskly down the side aisle. Jennifer, the venue coordinator. I recognized her from our email exchanges and the one video call we'd had 6 months ago. She went straight to the altar, not rushing, but with a clear purpose. Period. The officiant stopped mid-sentence. The music faltered. Guests turned in their seats, a ripple of confusion moving through the crowd, like wind over water. Jennifer leaned in and whispered something to the officiant, then to Jacob, then to Hazel. Even through the camera, I could see my sister's face change, the dreamy expression curdling into something that looked like panic. Jennifer stepped back and faced the assembled crowd, and someone must have handed her the microphone, because suddenly her voice came through crystal clear. "Ladies and gentlemen, I apologize for the interruption. I'm Jennifer Morrison, the venue coordinator, and we have a payment discrepancy that needs to be resolved before we can proceed." The whispers from the guests grew louder. I could see my mother in the front row, her face already flushing red, starting to rise from her seat. Jennifer continued, professional and calm, as if she announced financial crises at weddings every day. The contract for this event specified a payment structure of an $80,000 non-refundable deposit, received 6 months ago, and a final payment of $170,000, which was to be processed upon confirmation of the final guest list. I watched Hazel's hand go to her neck, and I watched Jacob turn to look at his bride with an expression I couldn't quite decipher. The contract included a specific clause, Jennifer said, and I could hear the rustle of paper as she pulled out a document, stating that the completion payment was contingent upon the confirmed attendance of the principal financial sponsor as a guest. Period. According to the signed agreement, the guest list was to be verified 48 hours prior to the event. My mother was on her feet now, and I could see her mouth moving through the microphone didn't pick up her words. Period. Jennifer's voice remained steady. The principal sponsor, Ms. Natalie Carter, was removed from the guest list 2 days ago. As per Section 4.2 of the signed contract, this action voided the completion payment. The payment was declined this afternoon when we attempted to process it. The venue erupted. I could hear the chaos even through my phone's tiny speaker guests, talking over each other, someone shouting, the string quartet frozen with their instruments. Period. The camera swung wildly for a moment, before steadying on Hazel's face, which had gone from a bridal glow to a pasty shade of grey in seconds. Period. Jennifer raised her voice slightly. The family has two options. You can pay the outstanding $170,000 immediately to continue with the full ceremony and reception as planned. Or we can proceed with the basic ceremony package, already covered by the deposit, which includes this space for 1 hour, and the services of the officiant. No reception, no catering, no music beyond this point. My mother pushed her way to the front, and the camera caught it all in beautiful high definition. Linda Carter in her mother of the bride dress, her face contorted in rage, pointing at Jennifer, as if she could make this go away through sheer force of will. "This is extortion," my mother's voice rang out now, shrill and sharp. "My daughter already paid for this wedding. This is illegal." Jennifer held up the contract. "Mrs. Carter, that's your signature on page 4, acknowledging all terms and conditions, including the attendance clause. Ms. Natalie Carter structured the payment specifically to protect her investment. And you signed agreeing to those terms." I watched my mother snatch the contract from Jennifer's hand. I watched her stare at the signature that was undeniably her own. Period. I watched the comprehension dawn on her face that she had signed something without reading it, because she never imagined I would protect myself from my own family. Period. Hazel was sobbing now. Not pretty tears, but ugly, gasping sobs. Jacob had his arm around her but was staring at my mother with an expression that was rapidly shifting from confusion to anger. Period. The guests had their phones out, dozens of them, recording everything. The camera angle shifted again, capturing the full scope of the disaster. Period. The beautiful altar, the expensive flowers, the elegantly dressed crowd. And in the center of it all, my sister in her $15,000 dress. My mother holding a contract she never bothered to read, and a venue coordinator calmly waiting for someone to produce $170,000 that no one there had. Period. I set my drink down and checked the view count on the live stream. It had passed 50,000, then 100,000. Period. The comments section was scrolling so fast I couldn't read the individual messages, just a blur of reactions, judgments, and fascination. Period. I closed the app and looked out at the ocean where the sun was beginning to set in shades of orange and pink that Hazel would never see because she was too busy watching her perfect day implode on camera. Period. My phone started vibrating with notifications. I picked it up and saw the video had been clipped and shared across social media. 5 million views in 6 hours. The top comment with 200,000 likes read simply, The excluded sister is a savage queen. I turned my phone face down and went to order another drink. When I woke up the next morning, the story had escaped the confines of wedding drama and become something else entirely. Period. I made coffee in my bungalow's kitchenette and opened my laptop to find my sister's failed wedding splashed across every major news outlet I could think of. Period. Not just tabloids or gossip sites, but real news organizations with editorial standards and fact-checkers. Sister scraps wedding after ban genius or cruelty, read the headline of a major women's lifestyle site. The article included screenshots from the livestream quotes from supposed etiquette experts debating the morality of my actions and an analysis of contract law that was surprisingly accurate. Period. They had even found a legal analyst who explained that contingent payment clauses were perfectly valid and in fact quite smart in situations involving large sums of money between family members. Period. I scrolled through article after article, each one dissecting what had happened from a different angle. Financial experts praised the protective contract structure. Therapists opined on family dynamics and financial abuse. Wedding planners discussed whether venues should require such clauses more often. Period. Someone had even created an infographic showing the payment schedule and contract terms, complete with highlighted sections and arrows pointing to the attendance clause my mother had signed. Period. But it was the response on social media that truly stunned me. I opened Reddit and found not one but 7 different threads about the wedding, the largest one with over 40,000 comments. The post title read, AAITE Sister Edition. Woman pulls wedding funding after being uninvited. And the discussion had been raging for 12 hours straight. I scrolled through the comments expecting condemnation, bracing myself for strangers to tell me I was petty, vindictive, and cruel. Period. Instead, I found something I didn't expect. Support. Overwhelming, passionate support. NTA. She paid for the wedding. They uninvited her. Play stupid games, win stupid prizes. Read one comment with 18,000 upvotes. This is what financial boundaries look like. Every eldest daughter who has been used as their family's ATM is cheering right now, said another. The contract clause was genius. She knew her family would do this. She protected herself. This isn't revenge, it's self-preservation, wrote someone else. The moderators had added a poll to the thread, asking if my actions were justified. 85% voted yes. 85% of thousands of strangers looked at what I did and said I was in the right. Period. I pushed away from the laptop, a strange feeling blooming in my chest. Validation, maybe? Or just the simple relief of being seen clearly by people who had no obligation to take my side. Period. My phone, which I had left charging overnight, lit up with notifications. I picked it up and watched the screen fill with missed calls and text messages. 47 calls from Hazel's number, 32, from my mother. 15 from numbers I didn't recognize. Probably relatives and family friends, calling to tell me what an awful person I was. Period. I methodically blocked them one after another. Hazel mum, the unknown numbers. I kept only one contact unblocked, Rachel's office line. If my lawyer needed to talk to me, I'd answer. Everyone else could wait until I decided I was ready to hear what they had to say. Period. As I was blocking the last number, a new notification popped up. An email from an address I didn't recognize. The subject line made me pause. For the excluded sister. I opened it to find a link to a GoFundMe page that had been set up in the last 12 hours. The title read, Support Fund for Sisters who sacrifice everything and get nothing. The description told a surprisingly accurate version of my story, considering how quickly it must have been assembled. Someone had taken the time to compile screenshots, quotes from news articles, and a passionate explanation of why what happened to me resonated with countless women who are expected to fund their family's happiness while their own needs are ignored. Period. The funding goal was set at $50,000, described as a symbolic gesture of solidarity. The amount raised so far was just over $200,000. I read that number 3 times, sure I was misunderstanding, but no. $200,000 in less than 24 hours, donated by thousands of people I'd never met, who saw what happened and decided they wanted to do something about it. The comments on the donations left a lump in my throat. For my sister, who paid for everyone's college but her own, because I was the family ATM for 20 years and no one ever said thank you. This is for every eldest daughter who was taught to make herself small. And I closed the laptop because I couldn't look at it anymore without crying. And I wasn't ready to cry yet, period. Instead, I went out to my deck and dove into the ocean, swimming hard and fast until my muscles burned and my mind finally quieted. When I came back an hour later, dripping and exhausted, I found another email waiting for me. This one from an address I did recognize: Jacob Morrison, my sister's fiancé. Or maybe not my sister's husband anymore, depending on how the rest of that disaster played out. The subject line read, "You were right about everything, and I have proof you need to see." I hovered my cursor over the delete button. I didn't need proof. I already knew I was right. I'd lived it for 34 years. Period. But something in the phrasing made me stop. Not, "I'm sorry." Not, "Please forgive Hazel." Not any of the pleas I might have expected. Just a simple statement. "You are right," and an offer of proof. I clicked the email open. The message itself was brief and businesslike, the kind of communication I'd expect from someone with a background in professional correspondence. "Ms. Carter, I apologize for contacting you directly, but I believe you deserve to know the full extent of what's been going on. I'm a forensic accountant, and I ran background checks on your family prior to the wedding as part of a standard financial audit. What I found concerns both you and Hazel. Your mother has been engaged in financial fraud that goes far beyond what happened with the wedding funds. I have compiled evidence that I think you need to see. The attached file contains records from 2018 through last month. I understand if you don't want to open it, but if you do, I think you'll understand why I cannot proceed with this marriage until certain truths come to light. Respectfully, Jacob Morrison." I stared at the email for a long moment, then at the attachment. The file name was clinical and precise. Linda_Carter_financial_records 2018 to 2022 redacted .pdf. My hand was shaking slightly as I moved the cursor over the attachment. I thought I knew the worst of what my mother had done. I thought the wedding fund and the systematic exclusion were the full extent of the betrayal. Period. But something in Jacob's careful wording suggested I was only seeing the surface of something much deeper. I thought of Helen's words the night before, about the woman who won $2 million and lost everyone she loved, about the cost of truth and the price of freedom. Then I thought of those 8,000 strangers who had donated money because my story resonated with something in their own lives. People who understood what it felt like to be used and discarded by the people who were supposed to love you the most. I clicked on the attachment and watched as the PDF began to download a progress bar, slowly filling my screen, bringing with it answers to questions I hadn't known I was supposed to ask, period. The PDF took almost a minute to download the progress bar, inching across the screen while I sat frozen in my chair, half wishing it would finish and half praying my internet would fail. As I waited, my mind did what it always did when confronted with uncomfortable truths about my family. It went back in time, sifting through memories. For the moment things went wrong, as if I could pinpoint the exact juncture where love had curdled into exploitation. Period. I was 10 when I baked my first birthday cake. I remember standing on a stool in the kitchen reading the directions off the back of a boxed mix, because it was all we had in the pantry. My mother had promised me a party, had even let me invite 3 friends from school. But that morning, Hazel had woken up with a fever period, nothing serious, but enough to send my mother into crisis mode. She called my friend's parents to cancel and spent the entire day hovering over 6-year-old Hazel with cool compresses and children's Tylenol, murmuring reassuring words. I waited until she was busy and made the cake myself, chocolate from a box with frosting from a can I found in the back of a cupboard. Period. I even found 10 candles in a drawer and arranged them carefully on top. When my mother finally came downstairs that evening and saw me sitting at the kitchen table with my homemade cake and no friends, she looked at me with such surprise as if she'd genuinely forgotten what day it was. "Oh, honey," she'd said, "you should have reminded me." But Hazel had needed her, and Hazel's needs always came first. And even at 10, I understood that my birthday wasn't an emergency worth remembering. 6 years later, when I was 16, I learned what it meant to make other people's dreams possible at the expense of my own. Hazel had gotten into Westfield Academy, a private school with an arts program my mother insisted would nurture her talents. The tuition was $18,000 a year, and we did not have $18,000. We didn't have $1,800. My mother sat me down at that same kitchen table and explained the situation, tears in her eyes. Hazel was special, talented, deserving of opportunity. Of course I understood. Of course I wanted what was best for my sister. I had gone to school the next day and started working 3 jobs, my grades slipping, my own college applications suffering. But Hazel got her private school education. And when my mother thanked me, she said it so simply, so matter-of-factly. "It's your duty as the eldest." The first item made me lose my breath. Wire transfer from Natalie Carter Wedding Fund. Total received $250,000. The second item, payments to verified wedding vendors $80,000. I stared at those 2 numbers. The mathematics of betrayal laid out on a spreadsheet. $250,000, given $80,000 spent for its stated purpose. $170,000 unaccounted for, period. My hands were shaking as I scrolled to the next page, already knowing that whatever Jacob had discovered, it was worse than I imagined, because it always was with my family. The truth was always deeper, darker, more calculated than I wanted to believe, period. I was halfway through the second page when my laptop pinged with a video call. Jacob Morrison's name flashed on the screen. I stared at it for a moment, debating whether I wanted to have this conversation. Then I decided that if he had gone to the trouble of compiling this documentation, I at least owed him the courtesy of hearing him out. Period. His face appeared on the screen, and he looked terrible, exhausted and unshaven, still wearing what looked like the dress shirt from the wedding, though the tie was gone and the collar was unbuttoned. He was sitting in what looked like a hotel room, generic art on the walls behind him. "Ms. Carter," he said, his voice formal, despite the informal setting. "Thank you for answering. I wasn't sure you would." "I wasn't sure I should," I replied. "But your email was intriguing. You said you're a forensic accountant." He nodded, running a hand through his hair. "Senior partner at Morrison and Associates. We specialize in fraud detection and asset verification. When my family learned I was getting married, they insisted on a prenuptial agreement, standard practice for us considering our portfolio. That meant running background checks and financial due diligence on Hazel's family." I felt a cold knot in my stomach. "You investigated us." "I investigated your mother," he corrected. "And what I found made me dig deeper. 3 prior bankruptcies under 2 different variations of her name. outstanding liens on properties in 2 states, a pattern of opening credit accounts and defaulting that goes back 20 years. He leaned closer to the camera. Ms. Carter, your mother is what we call a sophisticated financial predator. She's been doing this for a very long time. I thought of the house Hazel drove the birthday cakes I'd made myself, the pattern I had been too close to see clearly. The prenup, I said. You mentioned Linda avoided signing it for 6 weeks. Jacob's jaw tightened. She kept making excuses. The lawyer was too expensive. She needed time to understand the terms. She wanted to add clauses. Finally, 2 weeks before the wedding, she signed, but by then I had found something that made me realize the prenup wouldn't protect me from the real problem. What did you find? Credit accounts in your name, 4 of them opened in the last 3 years. Total balance $60,000. When I showed the evidence to Hazel, she had no idea what I was talking about. She genuinely believed you were wealthy and successful and had paid for the wedding out of an unlimited reservoir of cash. He paused. That's when I realized Hazel wasn't a co-conspirator. She was just another victim. The word victim applied to my sister felt strange. I had spent so many years resenting her, envying the way my mother protected and prioritized her, that I had never considered she might be trapped in a different kind of cage. The marriage license, I said, remembering what he'd mentioned in the email. You said it was never filed. Linda offered to take care of all the paperwork, said she knew someone at the county clerk's office who could expedite the processing. I thought it was generous, one less administrative task to worry about during the honeymoon. His expression darkened. 3 days ago, I called the county clerk's office to request a certified copy for some financial documentation I needed. They had no record of our marriage. I checked with the officiant. He handed the signed license to Linda immediately after the ceremony. She was supposed to file it within 72 hours. She never intended to file it, I said, the understanding dawning. If there's no legal marriage, she maintains more control over Hazel. No commingled assets, no legal protections easier to manipulate. Exactly. Jacob looked directly into the camera. Ms. Carter, I need you to understand something. I love Hazel, but I can't marry into a family where the mother has financial schemes that could compromise my entire family. My parents trusted Linda when she told them Hazel needed emergency surgery last year. They wired $40,000 directly to what they thought was a hospital account. I brought a hand to my mouth. There was no surgery. Hazel had a routine dental cleaning that week. That was it. The money went into an account I traced back to your mother through 3 shell corporations. He picked up a piece of paper and held it up to the camera. This is just one example. I've found at least 7 other incidents where Linda has solicited money from people using fabricated emergencies. Your contribution to the wedding wasn't an isolated incident. It was part of a pattern. I thought of all the times my mother had called with urgent needs: the medical bills, the car repair, the property tax emergency. How many of them were real? How many had I funded without question because I was trained from childhood to believe that questioning meant I didn't love my family enough? Why are you telling me this? I asked. Why me specifically? Because you were the only one who saw enough to protect yourself. That contract clause was brilliant. It told me you already suspected something was wrong. He leaned back in his chair. And because I need your help. If I prosecute this, if I go after Linda for the fraud against my family, Hazel could be implicated as an accomplice. Her name is on some of the accounts. She signed documents Linda gave her without reading them. I've been trying to figure out how to protect Hazel while still holding Linda accountable. You want my help to prove Hazel was manipulated, I said slowly, that she didn't know what Linda was doing. I want to help you both, Jacob said. I have 8 months of forensic documentation, bank statements, forged signatures, the full financial trail. But I'm an outsider. You're the one who has lived with this for 34 years. You're the one who can testify to the pattern of manipulation and control. I sat back processing what he was offering: an alliance with my sister's almost husband, a way to expose my mother that might actually protect Hazel instead of destroying her, the possibility that maybe, just maybe, my sister and I had been victims of the same con, just in different ways. Send me everything you have, I said. Jacob nodded and started typing at his keyboard. A moment later, another notification popped up on my screen. An encrypted file transfer. wed_fund_tracker.xlsx. I read aloud. What am I looking at here? Every funding source Linda solicited for the wedding. Your $250,000 is the largest single contribution. I forwarded Jacob's files along with my own documentation and waited. Michelle worked fast, but it took time for the screen to process years of financial records. I spent those hours swimming, reading on my deck, pointedly not checking social media to see what new fallout had emerged from the wedding disaster. Period. When my laptop finally pinged with a video call 6 hours later, I had almost managed to convince myself that maybe the situation wasn't as bad as I feared. Michelle's face appeared on screen, and I knew instantly from her expression that it was worse. Nat, she said, Jed, no preamble. How much do you know about identity theft? My stomach dropped. Theoretically, a lot. Personally, your mother opened 4 credit cards in your name 3 years ago, American Express Visa MasterCard and a Discover card. The current combined balance is just over $60,000. She pulled up a spreadsheet and shared her screen. The accounts were opened using your social security number, your date of birth, and addresses you haven't lived at in years. She's been making minimum payments to keep them from defaulting, but the interest has been compounding. This is why you couldn't get that bank loan last year for the apartment you wanted to buy. I remembered that rejection letter, the confusion I felt when the loan officer mentioned my debt-to-income ratio was too high. I had checked my credit report and seen nothing unusual, or so I'd thought. How did I not see this on my credit check? She used old addresses and a P.O. box. The statements never came to you. She intercepted everything. Michelle's fingers flew across the keyboard. But that's just the beginning. The wedding fund money, the $170,000, that didn't go to vendors, I've traced it through 3 accounts. First, it landed in your mother's personal checking account, sat there for 48 hours. Then was wired to a business account, registered to a company called Hazel's Future Enterprises. Has a business. Hazel's name is on the registration, but she's not a signatory on the account. Only your mother has access. From there, the money was wired to an offshore account in the Cayman Islands. I can see the transfer out, but I can't see where it went without a subpoena. I felt dizzy. The sophistication of it, the deliberately layered structure designed to hide and protect, was far beyond what I imagined my mother was capable of. What else? Michelle took a deep breath. Your identity was used to co-sign 3 loans over the last 4 years. A car loan for a Honda Accord, registered in Hazel's name, $22,000. A personal loan described as a security deposit for apartment, $8,000. And a business investment loan for the same Hazel's Future Enterprises, $55,000. Total additional debt in your name, $85,000. The number was so large it felt abstract. $85,000 in debt I had never agreed to, for things I had never bought, stuck to my credit history like barnacles on the hull of a ship. None of these loans are being paid properly, Michelle continued. The car loan is 3 months behind. The personal loan is in default. The business loan has been restructured twice. Your credit score has dropped 140 points in the last 18 months, And you had no idea, because all the collection notices were going to addresses and email accounts you don't monitor. I thought of all the opportunities I had missed in the past year. The apartment I couldn't buy, the lower interest rate. I couldn't get on my car. The credit card application that was denied, all of it. Attributable to damage. I didn't cause debts. I didn't incur a financial identity that had been stolen and wrecked by the woman who raised me. Michelle, I said carefully, in your professional opinion, what am I looking at here? She looked at me through the screen, her expression grave. This isn't family drama, Nat. This is identity theft, wire fraud, and financial exploitation. These are federal crimes. The offshore transfer could be considered money laundering depending on the use of the account in the Caymans. If you wanted to press charges, the evidence is rock solid. Documentary proof pattern of behavior, clear intent to defraud. What kind of consequences are we talking about? Federal sentencing guidelines for this level of financial fraud, 10 to 15 years in prison. Restitution of all stolen funds, plus fines. A permanent criminal record. She paused. But you need to act relatively quickly. Some of these incidents are approaching the statute of limitations. The older credit cards, for example, might be harder to prosecute if you wait too long. I leaned back in my chair, the sea breeze suddenly feeling too cold on my skin. 10 to 15 years. My 62-year-old mother could spend the rest of her functional life in a federal prison for stealing from her own daughters, for building a fraudulent financial empire on the back of family trust. My phone rang before I could answer Rachel's office number. I held up a finger to Michelle and answered. Natalie. Rachel's voice was urgent. I've been reviewing the documentation you sent over. We need to talk about next steps. If you want to press charges against your mother, Linda could be looking at 10 to 15 years in federal prison for what she's done. But the statute of limitations on some of these crimes is running out. We need to move fast if you're going to proceed. I looked out at the ocean, at the paradise I had bought with my own money, at the peace I had claimed for myself. Then I thought of my sister, of Jacob, trying to protect her, of all the other people my mother had stolen from with her fabricated emergencies and crises. How fast? I asked Rachel. We should file within the next 2 weeks to be safe. I can start drafting the complaint now, but I need your decision. Are you ready for this? I thought of the birthday cake I'd made myself at 10, the money I'd borrowed at 16, the $250,000 that became my sister's wedding, the credit cards and loans and debts that had wrecked my financial future while I was working and saving and trying to build something for myself. Yes, I said. I'm ready. Draft it. I flew back to Boston 3 days later. The Maldives had served its purpose, giving me distance and clarity, and the space to make decisions that would have been impossible if I'd stayed close to the wreckage. Period. Rachel advised I should return for the initial legal proceedings. Besides, I had things in my apartment. I needed documents to organize a life to reclaim from the ashes of the one my family had set on fire. Period. I had been home for less than 2 hours when I heard the key turn in the lock. For a split second, I froze, confused about who would have access, before I remembered my mother had a key. If she had one, she had probably given one to Hazel at some point, another small way to signal who truly belonged and who was only permitted to exist on the periphery. Period. The door swung open and Hazel burst in, still wearing clothes that looked expensive and carefully chosen, though her hair was unkempt and her makeup was smudged as if she'd been crying for days. She probably had. "You destroyed my wedding," she shrieked before I could get a word out. "You destroyed my reputation, my relationship, my entire life. Do you have any idea what you've done?" I put down the file folder I was organizing and looked at her with what I hoped was complete neutrality. "I saved you $250,000. You destroyed your own lies, Hazel. I just stopped paying for them, just them. She stared at me as if I'd slapped her. How can you be so cold? You're my sister. You're supposed to love me. I did love you, I said quietly. I loved you enough to give you everything I had. Apparently that still wasn't enough to secure me a seat at your wedding. Mum said it would be easier without you there. She said you would understand. Hazel's voice broke. She promised you'd forgive me, like you always do. You always forgive me, Natalie. It's what we do. We're family. Something in the way she said it, the absolute certainty that my forgiveness was a given, made my jaw tighten. Tell me something, Hazel. Did Jacob's family really call off the engagement? Her face crumpled. They think I was part of it. They think I helped Mum scam you and them and everyone. Jacob won't even talk to me until his lawyers are done with some investigation. I've lost everything, and it's all your fault. My fault, I repeated, tasting the words. Not Mum's fault for stealing the money. Not your fault for never once asking where $250,000 came from, or whether I could actually afford it. My fault for finally saying no. You don't know what it's like, she said, the tears flowing freely now. You've always been the successful one, the smart one, the one who has it all figured out. I needed that wedding. I needed something beautiful and perfect because my whole life I've been in your shadow. I went to my desk and picked up the folder Michelle had prepared for me, copies of every fraudulent document, every record of stolen identity, all the evidence of what our mother had really been doing all these years. I held it out to Hazel. Read every page, I said. She looked at me through red-rimmed, crying eyes. It wasn't a scholarship application. It was an $18,000 personal loan. I said co-signed in my name without my knowledge with your signature as the primary borrower. You were a minor. The contract should have been void, but Mum knew most lenders don't check ages carefully if the paperwork looks legit. Hazel's hands started to shake. She dropped the document and picked up another, this time a printed email chain. I watched her read through messages from debt collectors sent to an email address I recognized as hers, but with one letter different. A tiny alteration that would redirect correspondence to an account she'd never see. Period. There were dozens of them. Collection notices, payment demands, threats of legal action, all intercepted by our mother, before Hazel ever knew they existed. She told me you were rich, Hazel said suddenly, looking up from the emails. She said you made so much money at your job, you didn't even notice when you helped the family out. She made it sound like asking for the wedding money was like asking for pocket change. Her voice cracked. I never questioned where you would get that much money because Mum made it seem like it was nothing. I thought of all the times I had worked overtime, taken on extra projects, skipped vacations, and new clothes, and anything that felt like an indulgence for myself, all to build up a savings that my mother characterized as effortless abundance. She's very good at making people believe what she needs them to believe. Hazel picked up her phone with trembling fingers and dialed. I heard the phone ring on speakerphone, and our mother's voice answered with a false brightness. Hazel, sweetie, are you okay? I was so worried. Did you steal from both of us? Hazel asked, her voice stronger than I expected. Did you forge my signatures, open accounts in Natalie's name, lie about everything? There was a pause. Then Linda's voice shifted to something softer, more wounded. Hazel, honey, you don't understand. I did what I had to do to give you opportunities I never had. Everything I did was for you and your sister to give you a better life. You stole Natalie's identity, Hazel said. And she was crying again now, but her voice didn't waver. You wrecked her credit. You took $250,000 and only spent $80,000 on my wedding. Where did the rest of it go, Mum? Where did all that money go? I was protecting it. investing it for your future. You have to understand. I grew up with nothing. I watched my own mother beg for food. I swore my daughters would never know that kind of poverty. Linda's voice took on a pleading tone. Everything I did out of love. Love doesn't steal, Hazel whispered. Love doesn't forge signatures and intercept collection notices and lie about who has money and who doesn't. Love doesn't destroy one daughter to prop up another. She hung up before our mother could reply and stood there staring at the phone as if she didn't recognize it. When she finally looked at me, her face was ravaged with the kind of grief that comes from watching your entire understanding of reality crumble. My car, my apartment, my wedding. Everything I thought I'd earned or deserved or worked for it was all built on money stolen from you, wasn't it? Most of it, yes. And I never knew. I never asked the right questions. She pressed her hands to her face. How can you even look at me? How can you stand to be in the same room with me after what she turned me into? I sat down next to her on the couch, keeping a careful distance. You didn't know Hazel. She played us both, just in different ways. She made you think I had everything so you wouldn't feel guilty for asking. She made me think it was my duty to give, so I wouldn't question why I was the only one sacrificing. Hazel looked at me through tears that were now flowing freely, and I saw something in her expression I had never seen before. Not the entitled little sister who expected me to fix everything. Not the golden child who never had to question where the good things came from. Just a 28-year-old woman realizing her entire life had been a construct built on someone else's suffering. What do we do now? She asked, her voice small and lost. Can we still stop her? I thought of Rachel's complaint, of the federal charges waiting to be filed, of the choice I had already made, while sitting in paradise as my sister's wedding collapsed. We can stop her, I said, but it's going to cost us both everything we thought we knew about our family. Are you ready for that? Hazel wiped her eyes and looked at the documents spread across my coffee table, evidence of years of systematic fraud and manipulation. Period. Then she looked at me and nodded. Tell me what to do. Rachel's office occupied the 40th floor of a building in the financial district, all glass and polished wood, and the kind of quiet efficiency that came with a $900 an hour billing rate. Period. I had been there before for contract reviews and business consultations, but never for something like this. Never to discuss the possibility of sending my own mother to federal prison. Rachel met me in the conference room, spreading documents across the table, with the methodical precision I'd always admired in her work. Period. She'd been reviewing Michelle's forensic analysis for 3 days, cross-referencing it with federal statutes and case precedents, building what she called an unassailable case. The evidence is overwhelming, she said, pulling up a summary document on her laptop. Identity theft under federal statute, wire fraud, crossing state lines, financial exploitation of a dependent relationship. Any one of these charges would be serious. Together, we're looking at a 10 to 15-year sentence in federal prison, possibly more depending on how aggressive the prosecutor wants to be. I sat across from her, feeling the weight of what I was about to set in motion. Explain the problems to me. The main complication is Hazel. Rachel pulled out 3 loan documents, each one bearing my sister's signature. Her name appears as the primary debtor on these loans, totaling $85,000. A prosecutor could argue she was a co-conspirator, especially since she directly benefited from 2 of them, the car and the apartment deposit. If they want to make an example of the whole family, they could charge her as an accessory to fraud. My stomach tightened. But she was 17 when she signed 2 of those. She thought they were scholarship applications. I know. And that's our strongest defense. Contracts signed by minors are voidable under Massachusetts law. We can argue she was too young to understand what she was signing, that your mother deliberately misrepresented the documents. Rachel tapped the third document. This one's trickier. She was 21 when she signed this college loan. It would be harder to shield her if we can't prove she was fraudulently induced. I thought of Hazel sitting on my couch, reading through 6 hours of evidence. The look on her face when she realized what our mother had done was unforgettable. She didn't know the terms. Mum told her it was financial aid, handled all the paperwork, and intercepted all the statements. Hazel never saw a single document after she signed. Period. That could work as a defense of fraud, but it's not a slam dunk. Rachel leaned back in her chair, watching me closely. Natalie, I need to ask you something directly. What do you want out of this? Because there's a version where we go after Linda with everything we have, and Hazel gets caught in the crossfire. And there's a version where we try to protect your sister, but that might mean accepting a slightly lighter sentence for your mother. I looked out the window at the Boston skyline, the city where I had worked so hard to build something for myself, the place I called home, while my family had been slowly dismantling everything I'd created. What did I want? Justice, yes. Accountability, absolutely. But revenge, destroying Hazel to punish my mother. I want justice, I said carefully. But I don't want to destroy my sister if she was also manipulated. She spent the last 2 days realizing her entire life was built on lies and stolen money. She's a victim here, just a different kind than me. Rachel nodded as if she'd expected that answer. Would she have to testify in court in front of Mum? I asked. Potentially yes, if this goes to trial, Rachel replied. But there's a good chance Linda will take a plea deal once she sees the evidence and knows her own daughter is willing to testify against her. Rachel pulled up a draft of a cooperation agreement on the screen. The prosecutor will want detailed deposition documentation of every time Linda lied to her, every signature she forged, every piece of financial information she withheld. It won't be easy for Hazel. I thought of my sister asking me what to do, the desperation in her voice when she'd asked if we could still stop our mother. She'd said she wanted to help, but I didn't know if she understood what that meant. Then we need to make sure she understands before she agrees to anything, I said. Period. Rachel started typing. I can arrange for her to meet with the U.S. Attorney's Office. Let them explain exactly what cooperation would entail. But Natalie, you need to understand something too. Once we start this process, once we get federal prosecutors and immunity deals involved, there's no going back. Your mother will know Hazel chose your side. That relationship, whatever is left of it, will be over. I knew Rachel was right. My mother wouldn't forgive betrayal, especially not from the daughter she had spent 28 years positioning as her golden child, her success story, her justification for everything she'd done. But maybe that relationship needed to be over. Maybe it needed to be broken so Hazel could be free, just like I was trying to be. Set up the meeting, I said. Let Hazel hear what it involves, then she can make her own choice. Rachel nodded and picked up her phone to call the prosecutor's office. Before she could dial, there was a knock on the conference room door. Her assistant poked her head in, looking apologetic. Sorry to interrupt, but there's a Hazel Carter here. She doesn't have an appointment, but she says it's urgent, and she needs to speak with you, Ms. Morgan. Rachel and I exchanged a look. I hadn't told Hazel where I was going today. I hadn't wanted to pressure her before she was ready, but somehow she had figured it out, tracked me down, and shown up ready to face whatever came next. Send her in, Rachel said. Period. The door opened and Hazel walked in, looking small and scared but determined. Her eyes were still red from crying, but her shoulders were set, with something that looked almost like resolve. She looked at me, then at Rachel, then back to me. I'll testify, she said, her voice steadier than I expected. I'll tell them everything Mom did, every lie, every signature she forged, every time she manipulated me into thinking you were the problem instead of her. Whatever you need me to do, I'll do it." The package from Massachusetts General Hospital arrived 2 days after Hazel agreed to cooperate with the prosecution. I had been expecting legal documents, subpoenas, the machinery of justice grinding into gear. Instead, I got a cardboard box with my father's name on the return label and a note from a nurse named Patricia, explaining that Richard Carter had suffered a minor stroke and wanted his personal effects sent to me while he recovered. Period. I carried the box to the kitchen table and opened it slowly, half afraid of what I'd find. My father had always been the quiet one in the family. The man who worked his accounting job came home and disappeared into his study or the garage, avoiding conflict with the same dedication most people showed to pursuing it. I'd never blamed him for my mother's behavior, because he seemed as much a victim of her manipulations as Hazel and I, just older and more resigned. Period. Inside the box were the usual items from a hospital stay: reading glasses, a paperback mystery novel, his wedding ring, which surprised me as I'd assumed he still wore it. At the bottom, wrapped in a plastic grocery bag, was a leather-bound journal that looked like it had been carried and handled for years. I pulled it out and opened it to the first page. My father's handwriting, neat and precise as always, dated 23 years ago. Period. The entry was short. Linda borrowed $3,000 from Natalie's college fund today. Told her it was for car repairs. The car is fine. I don't know where the money went. I should say something. I won't. And my hands started to shake. I flipped through the pages, scanning entries that spanned 2 decades of my life. Each one documented something my mother had done, some theft or manipulation or lie, and they all ended the same way. I should say something. I won't. I am a coward. I choose peace. There were notes about the $250,000 I'd lent her, which my father knew instantly wasn't for medical bills. Notes about Hazel signing loan documents when she was too young to understand. Notes about the credit cards opened in my name, about the intercepted mail, about the elaborate stories my mother had spun to explain why she needed money from relatives and friends and anyone who would give it to her. My father had documented everything. He had seen it all, understood exactly what was happening, and had done absolutely nothing to stop it. Period. I found an entry from 6 years ago that made me close the journal and step away for a moment, too angry to keep reading. Linda is destroying Natalie's credit. I can see the bills she hides, the collection notices she intercepts. My daughter is working herself to the bone to save money that Linda steals as fast as Natalie can earn it. I tell myself I stay quiet to keep the family together. The truth is, I'm afraid. Afraid Linda will leave. Afraid the girls will blame me. Afraid to be alone. So I do nothing, and my silence makes me complicit in everything she does to them. I wanted to call the hospital and scream at him to demand how he could watch this happen for 20 years and never warn me, never step between his wife and his daughters. But underneath the anger was something more complex. Sadness, maybe the recognition that my father had been trapped in his own cage, one built of fear and conflict avoidance, and the terrible human capacity to rationalize inaction. I kept reading. The entries grew more detailed as the years went on, as if my father had decided that if he couldn't act, he could at least bear witness. There were records of every major theft, every manipulation, every time my mother had used one daughter to control the other. Then 5 years ago, the entries changed. I can't stop Linda. I've proven that to myself countless times. But I can try to repair some of the damage. I've opened a separate account, one she doesn't know about. Every bonus, every tax refund, every penny I can squirrel away from her goes into this account. It's for Natalie, for when she finally understands what her mother has done to her, for when she's ready to break free. I flipped through the pages frantically looking for more details and found them in an entry from 3 months ago. The account is at $500,000, now enough to repay what Linda stole and then some. I keep wanting to tell Natalie to give her the account information and let her access her own salvation, but if Linda finds out she'll demand half in the divorce I know is coming. She'll claim it as marital property. She'll find a way to take it, just like she's taken everything else. So I stay silent again, waiting for the right moment. And the right moment never comes because I'm too much of a coward to create it. There was a letter tucked in the back of the journal, sealed in an envelope, with my name written in my father's careful script. I opened it with trembling fingers and read words that felt like they were written by a ghost. Natalie, if you're reading this, it means I've either finally found the courage to give you what you're owed, or I've died before I could be that brave. Either way, I need you to know that I saw it all. I documented it all. And I did nothing to stop it, because I was afraid of what standing up would cost me. I chose my own comfort over your protection, and that makes me just as guilty as your mother in my own way. The account information is enclosed. The money is yours, earned by my silence and your suffering. It's not enough. It will never be enough. But it's all I have to give you now. Please forgive me for being the father who watched instead of the father who fought. I should have known my mother wouldn't go down quietly. I had spent 34 years watching her manipulate situations to her advantage, crafting narratives that made her the victim and everyone else the villain. But I had somehow convinced myself that faced with hard evidence, documented fraud, and the testimony of her own daughter, she would have no choice but to accept responsibility. I had underestimated her one last time. The press conference happened 3 days after Rachel informed me about the defense attorney. I was at work, trying to focus on a client presentation, when my phone started vibrating with notifications, news alerts, texts from friends, emails with links to a live stream. I excused myself from the conference room, found an empty office, and closed the door before I clicked the first link period. My mother was sitting at a table in what looked like a law office, flanked by Mark Shen, looking for all the world like a grieving, bewildered mother. She wore a simple navy dress, minimal makeup, and her hair was styled in a way that made her look older and more fragile than I had ever seen her. The performance had begun before she even opened her mouth. I want to start by saying that I love both my daughters, she said, her voice trembling just enough to sound authentic. What is happening now is breaking my heart, but I need to speak the truth, even if it's painful. She dabbed at her eyes with a tissue. My older daughter Natalie has struggled with mental health issues for many years. Depression, anger management problems, a pattern of jealousy toward her younger sister that I have tried desperately to help her overcome. I felt my breath catch in my throat, watching her weaponize my worst moments against me. Mark Shen slid a folder across the table, and my mother opened it with shaking hands. These are emails Natalie sent when she was 19 during a very dark period in her life. She held up printed pages I recognized immediately, messages I had sent to a college friend when I was drowning in depression, working 3 jobs to pay for Hazel's private school while my own grades were slipping. I hate my life, she read aloud. I hate who I've become. Sometimes I wish I could just disappear. The emails were real. The context was deliberately stripped away. And these, Linda continued, brandishing another document, are therapy records from when Natalie was 22. She was in treatment for anger management issues, for what her therapist described as unresolved resentment toward family members. She looked directly at the camera. I thought she was getting better. I thought the treatment was helping. But I realized now the anger never went away. It just went underground, waiting for an opportunity to strike. Mark Shen leaned forward. Ms. Carter believes her daughter engineered the wedding contract specifically to humiliate her sister, that she has been planning this public revenge for months, possibly years. The supposed evidence of financial fraud she believes has been fabricated or misconstrued to support a vendetta born of mental illness and sibling rivalry. I watched my mother nod sadly and add, the wedding contract had that clause because Natalie knew we would eventually realize we couldn't have her there. She has a history of making scenes of drawing attention to herself when the focus should be on Hazel. We were trying to protect Hazel's special day, and Natalie used it as an excuse to destroy it. The press conference continued for another 20 minutes, with my mother painting a picture of a disturbed daughter with a persecution complex, a woman so consumed by jealousy she had engineered an elaborate fraud scheme to punish her innocent family. She cried at the appropriate moments, expressed hope that I would get the help I needed. She forgave me for everything I had done, because that's what loving mothers do, period. The comments section on the live stream was already shifting. If she has documented mental health issues, maybe we need to rethink the narrative. Those therapy records are pretty damning. What if the sister really did make all this up? The support that had seemed so solid just days before was fracturing doubt, seeping in through carefully placed cracks. Period. By the time I left work that evening, the media landscape had changed. The outlets that had celebrated my protective contract were now running stories with headlines like "Mental Health and Family Conflict When Illness Leads to Revenge" and "Sisters' Fraud Allegations Under Scrutiny as Defense Reveals Psychological History." The comment sections I had been avoiding were now full of people calling me an unstable psychopath, a vengeful sister weaponizing mental illness claims, period. My work email was full of messages from colleagues expressing concern, though I could read the subtext clearly enough. Concern about being associated with me, concern about what my presence was doing to the firm's reputation. 2 clients had requested different analysts for their accounts. My supervisor scheduled a meeting for first thing the next morning. I spent the night awake, reading article after article, watching my credibility dissolve, as strangers who had never met me debated my mental stability based on emails I wrote 15 years ago, and therapy I sought as a young adult. The fact that I had gotten help, that I had worked through my issues and come out stronger, was being used as evidence that I was fundamentally broken. Hazel called at midnight, crying. She's showing those emails on purpose. She knew exactly what she was doing. She's making people think you're crazy, so they won't believe anything you say. I know, I said, too tired to feel anything but a dull ache where the anger should have been. What do we do? I thought of my father's journal, of 20 years of documentation that would prove my mother's pattern, went far beyond anything I could have invented. I thought of Rachel's confidence that the evidence was rock solid, that the truth would win out. But I also thought of how easily truth could be buried under the right narrative, how my mother had spent decades perfecting the art of making people believe whatever version of reality suited her best. We stick to the truth, I said, and we hope it's enough. The next morning I walked into my supervisor's office, knowing what was coming before he said it. David had always been supportive, had promoted me twice in the 5 years I'd worked at the firm. But he also had a company to protect shareholders, to answer to, and a reputation that couldn't afford to be tarnished by scandal. "Natalie," he said, not looking me directly in the eye, "we need you to take a leave of absence. Paid, of course, just until this media situation blows over. The attention is impacting our firm's reputation, and some clients have expressed concerns about the stability of their account management." "How long?" I asked, my voice flat. "As long as it takes. A month, maybe 2. After the legal proceedings are over and things calm down." He shifted uncomfortably. "This is not a reflection of your work. You're one of our best analysts. But right now, with everything in the news, with your mother's attorney alleging mental instability, I understand." I cut him off because I did. I understood that my mother had found the one weapon that could make people doubt everything else. Not evidence of her guilt, but questions about my sanity. Not proof of fraud, but hints that I was too damaged to see reality clearly, period. I cleaned out my desk that afternoon, carrying a box of personal items past colleagues, who suddenly found reasons to be very busy with their computers. As I walked to the elevator, I felt like a ghost in my own life, watching everything I had built crumble, because my mother knew exactly where to strike to make people question if it had ever been real in the first place. The tide turned 48 hours later, and it turned fast. I was sitting in my apartment, surrounded by boxes of evidence, helping Rachel and Michelle sort my father's journal entries chronologically, when my phone lit up with a news alert. Jacob Morrison had called a press conference. Period. I clicked on the live stream, my heart pounding, not knowing if this would help or make everything worse. He opened the first folder. I have spent 8 months conducting a forensic financial investigation into the Carter family's finances. What I discovered was a pattern of systematic theft, identity fraud, and financial exploitation targeting primarily Natalie Carter, but also other victims, including my own parents and several members of the community. He proceeded to lay out the evidence with devastating clarity, bank statements showing the $250,000 I had contributed, and where it had really gone. Credit card accounts opened in my name. With charges I'd never made, loan documents with forged signatures, the Cayman Islands account. Every piece of information Michelle had compiled was now being presented to the public by an unbiased third party. Someone who had everything to lose by telling the truth. Linda Carter's attorney has suggested that Natalie Carter fabricated this evidence due to mental health issues, Jacob continued, and I felt my stomach clench. I want to be clear. I am not related to Natalie Carter. I have no relationship with her beyond being the former fiancé of her sister. The evidence I am presenting was gathered independently through professional forensic analysis. This is not a family squabble. This is a documented financial crime. While Jacob was speaking, Michelle had apparently been busy with her own strategy. My phone buzzed with another alert. An anonymous report had been leaked to major news outlets. A comprehensive financial analysis titled A Pattern of Financial Exploitation, the Linda Carter Case Study. It was Michelle's work, stripped of any identifying information presented, as if it had come from a financial industry whistleblower. Period. The report laid out everything: the $340,000, stolen from me over 7 years through various schemes, the identity theft, the credit fraud, the systematic interception of financial communications graphs and charts showing the flow of money, the pattern of behavior, the sophistication of the operation. It was the kind of document that couldn't be dismissed as emotional or fabricated because it was built entirely on verifiable financial records. The media response was immediate. Outlets that had been running sympathetic stories about my mother 48 hours earlier were now scrambling to correct the record. Breaking. New evidence in wedding fraud case suggests extensive financial crimes. Read one headline. Forensic analysis reveals systematic theft by mother. Read another period. But what really turned everything around was the third victim who came forward that afternoon. Robert Patterson was a small business owner in our old neighborhood, a contractor. I vaguely remembered my mother mentioning him years ago, something about charity work they had done together. He gave his own brief press conference in front of his business, a stack of receipts in his hand. Last year, Linda Carter approached me about a cancer charity fund she was running, he said, his voice shaking with anger. She said she was raising money for childhood cancer research, showed me what looked like legitimate non-profit documentation, gave me tax-deductible forms. I donated $80,000 over 6 months. He held up the receipts. There was no charity. The non-profit registration was fake. The tax forms were fraudulent. Linda Carter stole $80,000 from me using a fake cancer charity. And when I found out and confronted her, she told me I must have misunderstood her intentions. Social media exploded. The hashtag that emerged wasn't a cruel one from 2 days ago, but hashtag Justice for Natalie, which trended within hours with thousands of posts from people apologizing for doubting me, sharing their own stories of familial financial abuse, and condemning my mother's manipulative tactics. I saw people who had called me an unstable psychopath, deleting their posts and railing against how my mother had weaponized the stigma of mental health period. News outlets started running investigative pieces, finding other people my mother had borrowed money from over the years, tracking down shell companies and fake business registrations, building a picture of someone who had been running financial scams for decades. Possibly, the narrative shifted from troubled daughter seeks revenge to sophisticated con artist exposed by brave victims. Period. My supervisor called that evening. Natalie, I want to apologize. I acted hastily. We'd like you to come back to work whenever you're ready. Take all the time you need, but your position is secure. I thanked him and hung up, feeling vindicated but also exhausted. The truth had won, but only after I had been publicly eviscerated, only after my mental health history had been broadcast to millions, only after I'd lost my job and had my reputation destroyed. The truth had won, but the cost had been devastating. Rachel called an hour later, and I could hear the satisfaction in her voice. The U.S. Attorney's Office just contacted me. They're moving forward with the charges. Federal agents are serving the arrest warrant at your mother's house as we speak. I pulled up a local news livestream and found it almost immediately. News crews were gathered in front of my mother's house, the same house I had visited for holidays and birthdays, where I had baked my own cake at 10 years old. Police cars filled the driveway, their flashing lights cutting through the evening darkness. Period. The front door opened and 2 federal agents emerged with my mother between them. She was still in the clothes she'd worn to the press conference, but her face held none of the serene sadness she had displayed for the cameras. She looked small older somehow, stripped of the confidence that came from controlling the narrative. Period. One of the agents spoke clearly for the cameras. Linda Carter, you are under arrest for identity theft, wire fraud, and financial exploitation. You have the right to remain silent. My mother's eyes found the cameras, and for a split second I saw her try to arrange her features into a look of sympathetic bewilderment, something that would make people doubt what they were seeing. But there were too many cameras, too much evidence, too many victims who had finally spoken up. The performance couldn't save her anymore. Period. They led her to the squad car, and I watched on my phone screen as the woman who had spent my entire life stealing from me and calling it love was finally held accountable for what she had done. The footage of my mother's arrest played on a loop for the next 24 hours. Every news channel showed the same images: Linda Carter in handcuffs, federal agents on either side. Neighbors watching from their porches as she was led to a squad car in front of the house she had lived in for 20 years. The spectacle was complete, a public humiliation that mirrored exactly what had happened to Hazel at the wedding. I should have felt satisfaction watching it. Instead, I felt something more complex that I didn't want to examine too closely. Period. Rachel called me the next morning to say the prosecutor wanted a meeting. Linda had been arraigned, bail set at $200,000, which she couldn't post. She was being held at the Federal Detention Center pending trial. I drove to the U.S. Attorney's Office with Hazel, who had insisted on coming, despite my suggestion that she might prefer to sit this one out. Period. Assistant U.S. Attorney Karen Williams met us in a conference room with certificate-lined walls and no-frills decor. She was in her 50s, with greying hair pulled back in a practical bun, and eyes that had clearly seen every variation of human behavior the criminal code had to offer. Your mother gave a statement during her processing, Karen said, sliding a transcript across the table. Her lawyer advised against it, but she insisted. I thought you should see what she said. I picked up the pages and started to read. The interrogation had started with basic questions about the charges which Linda had answered with denials and deflections. But then something had shifted, and the transcript showed her composure, carefully maintained for decades, finally cracking under the weight of federal charges and inescapable evidence. I did it for my daughters, she had said, according to the transcript. We were so poor after their father left so desperately poor. Do you have any idea what that's like? To have two little girls, no money, and no way to give them the life they deserved. But I remembered that time. I was only 8 when my father left. I felt Hazel's hand find mine under the table. If I don't testify, I asked, do you still have a case? We still have the documentary evidence, the forensic analysis, the testimony from Jacob and the other victims. We can still convict her. But without the emotional weight of your personal testimony, Karen said, without you getting on that stand and explaining what it felt like to discover your mother had been stealing your identity for years. A judge might be more lenient. She'd still go to prison, but maybe for 2 years instead of 15. Karen leaned back in her chair, studying my face. I need to be clear about something. This isn't a legal question. We have enough evidence to proceed either way. This is a moral question. What do you want, Natalie? Do you want maximum punishment for what she did to you? Do you want her to spend the rest of her functional life in a federal prison? Or do you want accountability with the possibility of redemption? I thought of the transcript in front of me of my mother's breakdown during the interrogation of her twisted but genuine belief that stealing from me had been an act of love, not betrayal. I thought of her childhood, which I knew had been marked by the same poverty and fear that had shaped her entire worldview. I thought of the birthday cake I'd made myself at 10, the money borrowed at 16, the identity stolen at 30. I thought of all of it, the full weight of 3 decades of financial abuse disguised as family obligation. Period. And then I thought of who I wanted to be on the other side of this. Not who my mother had made me, not who the trauma had shaped, but who I chose to become when I finally had the power to decide. I need time, I said. I need to think about what justice really means to me. Karen nodded as if she'd expected that answer. You have 2 weeks before we finalize our trial strategy. Take all the time you need. But Natalie, understand this. Whatever you decide will define the rest of your relationship with your mother and your understanding of yourself. Choose carefully. We left the prosecutor's office and stood in the parking lot, Hazel and I both carrying the weight of a decision that would determine our mother's fate. What are you going to do? Hazel asked quietly. Period. I looked up at the sky, at the clouds moving across the blue, and I realized I didn't know yet. But I had 2 weeks to decide if I wanted revenge or something else entirely. Period. I spent the first of those 2 weeks doing nothing but thinking. I took long walks through the Boston Common. I sat in coffee shops watching strangers live their uncomplicated lives. I lay awake at night, staring at the ceiling, trying to separate what I actually wanted from what I thought I should want. Hazel called every day with the same message delivered in slightly different words. Our mother deserved the maximum sentence. She deserved to lose everything the way she had tried to make us lose everything. She deserved 15 years in prison for 34 years of theft and manipulation. She destroyed you, Hazel said during one particularly intense conversation. She stole your money, your credit, your peace of mind. She made you work yourself to the bone while she took everything you earned. This isn't revenge, Natalie. It's justice. She deserves to face the full consequences of what she did. I knew Hazel was right about the facts. Our mother had done all of those things. She had stolen systematically and deliberately, had built an entire architecture of fraud on the back of my trust. But every time I tried to imagine myself in a courtroom arguing for her to spend the next 15 years in prison, something in me resisted. Not because she didn't deserve it, but because I couldn't figure out if pursuing the maximum sentence would set me free or just chain me to her in a different way. Period. On the 8th day, my phone rang with an international number I recognized. Helen calling from the Maldives. I saw the news. She said, no preamble. Your mother was arrested. I wanted to see how you were. We talked for over an hour, and I found myself telling her everything, the evidence, the charges, the choice the prosecutor had given me, the weight of deciding someone else's fate, even when that someone had spent decades trying to destroy mine. What do you think revenge really accomplishes? Helen asked. I could picture her sitting by that infinity pool, the same spot where she had first warned me about the cost of setting things on fire. It makes you feel powerful, I said, like you're finally in control. Period. For how long? She asked. And then what? You've destroyed someone, even someone who deserved to be destroyed, and you have to live with the fact that you're a person who chose destruction. She paused, and I heard the clink of ice in a glass on her end. Revenge is a meal that eats you alive, Natalie. It consumes you from the inside until you can't remember who you were before you started feeding it. But she has to face consequences, real consequences, not just a slap on the wrist. Absolutely, sir, Helen agreed. That's where justice comes in. Justice is freeing because it's not about your anger or your pain. It's about accountability, about the system acknowledging that a wrong was done and responding appropriately. Another pause. But mercy, she said, mercy is power. Real power. The kind that comes from being strong enough to choose something other than maximum damage, even when maximum damage is justified. I thought about that conversation for the next 6 days, about the difference between revenge and justice and mercy, about what each of them would cost me and what each of them would give me in return. I thought of my father's journal, his decades of documented cowardice, his choice of silence that had made him complicit in everything my mother did. I thought about becoming someone who chose differently, who found a way to hold people accountable, without becoming the kind of person who destroys others, even when I had the power to do so, period. On the 14th day, I called Karen Williams and told her my decision. I'll testify, I said. I'll tell the truth about everything she did, every theft, every manipulation, every lie. But I want you to offer her a plea deal. 5 years in federal prison, full restitution of the $340,000, and mandatory therapy for whatever trauma made her think stealing from her daughters was an acceptable way to survive. Karen was silent for a moment. That's significantly less than we could get at trial. You understand that, right? With your testimony, we could push for 15, maybe more. I understand, I said. But I don't want to be the person who argues for my mother's destruction, even if she deserves it. I want accountability. I want her to face what she did and hopefully understand why it was wrong. I want her to get help for whatever broke inside her that made this seem reasonable. I took a deep breath. And I want to be able to look at myself in 10 years and know I chose justice over revenge, even when revenge would have felt really good. Most victims don't think like that, Karen said. And I couldn't tell if she was impressed or disappointed. Most victims probably weren't raised by someone who taught them that cruelty can look like love if you frame it right, I replied. I don't want to be cruel even to someone who was cruel to me. I just want this to be over. Karen agreed to my terms and reached out to Linda's defense attorney. A week later, I was in a small conference room at the detention center, separated from my mother by reinforced glass and a telephone handset that felt heavy in my hand. Linda looked different in the orange jumpsuit, her hair unkempt grey roots showing her face bare of the makeup she always wore to present a carefully curated image. Period. She picked up the phone and looked at me with an expression I couldn't decipher. "They said you're going to testify," she said. "They said you're offering a plea deal, 5 years instead of 15. "Yes," I said. "Why?" The question was sharp, almost accusatory. Why show me mercy, Charles, when I never showed you any? I thought of all the answers I could give. Because I'm better than you. Because I want to be able to sleep at night. Because destroying you won't fix what you broke. But what came out was simpler and more honest. Because I want this to be over. I want you to face consequences and get help and maybe eventually understand what you did to us. But I don't want to spend the rest of my life being the daughter who sent her mother to prison for 15 years. The trial date was set for 3 weeks later. My mother would accept the plea deal, and I would give my victim impact statement. Then this chapter of my life would finally be closed, period. The courtroom was smaller than I expected, more intimate and less dramatic than television had prepared me for. Wood paneling, fluorescent lights, rows of benches where a handful of reporters and curious onlookers sat. My mother sat at the defense table in clothes her lawyer had chosen to make her look respectable and harmless. Her hands folded in her lap like she was at a church service instead of a federal plea hearing. I took the stand, put my hand on the Bible, swore to tell the truth, and spent the next 90 minutes doing just that. I walked the court through the timeline with the same precision I would use in a client presentation. The birthday cake at 10, the borrowed money at 16. The $250,000 at 34. That became Hazel's wedding. The credit cards opened in my name. The wedding fund that disappeared into offshore accounts. Every theft, every manipulation, every lie documented and presented without emotion, because emotion would make it too easy to dismiss. Period. Karen Williams guided me through the testimony with questions designed to establish patterns and intent. How many times had my mother asked for money? How many times had I later discovered the money was being used for purposes other than what she claimed? When did I first realize my credit had been destroyed? Then Mark Shen stood up for the cross-examination, and I watched him arrange his expression into something that looked almost sympathetic. "Ms. Carter," he began, "you've painted a very convincing picture of financial exploitation, but I'd like to talk about your mental health history." He held up a folder I recognized immediately. "These are therapy records from when you were 22, records that show you were diagnosed with major depressive disorder and were receiving treatment for what your therapist described as anger management issues, specifically anger directed at family members." The courtroom murmured. I felt my jaw tighten, but I kept my expression neutral. "Objection, Your Honor," Karen interjected. "The witness's mental health history from over a decade ago is not relevant to the documented financial crimes we are here to address." "It speaks to credibility and motive," Mark countered. "If Ms. Carter has a documented history of anger toward her mother and mental health struggles, the jury deserves to know that context when evaluating her testimony." The judge considered for a moment, then nodded. "I'll allow it. The records can be admitted." Mark turned back to me. "Ms. Carter, isn't it true that this entire case is just an elaborate form of revenge? That you have taken old resentments, legitimate or not, and built a narrative of victimization to justify destroying your mother?" Before I could answer, I heard a rustle behind me. Hazel stood up from the gallery. "Your Honor, I'd like to testify." The judge looked surprised, but motioned for her to be sworn in. Hazel took the stand, and I saw my mother's face go white. "Those therapy sessions Mr. Shen mentioned, Hazel said, her voice steady despite her trembling hands. I drove Natalie to them every appointment for 6 months. Do you know why she needed therapy at 22? She looked directly at Mark Shen. Because our mother had just stolen her college fund, $50,000, that Natalie had saved working 3 jobs. Natalie had to drop out of university her junior year. She was depressed because her mother had destroyed her future and called it love. She got help. She did the work. She moved past her anger and came out stronger. Our mother's pattern of theft continued for another 15 years after that. Natalie got better. Mum never did. The courtroom was completely silent. Mark Shen looked like he wanted to object, but couldn't find the grounds. Then the back door opened, and a woman in her 60s with greying hair and kind eyes walked in. She approached the bar with the confidence of someone who had done this before. Your Honor, I'm Dr. Patricia Shen. I was Miss Carter's therapist from 2013 to 2014. I'm here voluntarily as a character witness, and I have some clarification on the records the defense just submitted. The judge looked at Karen, who nodded quickly, and gestured for Dr. Shen to take the stand. These anger issues Mr. Shen referred to were not pathological, Dr. Shen said after being sworn in. They were a completely healthy response to financial abuse. Natalie came to me after discovering her mother had stolen a substantial amount of money. She was angry, yes, depressed, absolutely. But she sought treatment. She did the hard work, and she left therapy with healthy boundaries and coping mechanisms. This is what recovery looks like. She turned to look at my mother. I've read the case documents. Linda Carter's pattern of financial exploitation continued for 15 years after Natalie left my care. That's the difference between a victim who seeks help and a perpetrator who never stops. Natalie got better. Your mother got worse. Something in my mother broke in that moment. I saw it happen. I saw her carefully constructed composure shatter like glass. I did it, she cried out, getting to her feet despite her lawyer's attempts to stop her. I did all of it, every loan, every credit card, every lie. I stole from both my daughters and everyone who trusted me. I couldn't stop. I didn't know how to survive any other way. Mark Shen grabbed her arm, trying to get her to sit down, but she pulled away. I grew up so poor, Linda continued, tears streaming down her face. So desperately poor, and I swore my daughters would never know that fear. But the only way I knew how to keep that promise was to take and take and take until there was nothing left to take. The judge banged his gavel. Mrs. Carter, please be seated. Mr. Shen, control your client. Linda finally sat, and Mark leaned in to whisper urgently in her ear. After a moment, he stood and addressed the judge. Your Honor, in light of my client's statement and the testimony we've heard today, I'd like to request a recess to discuss plea negotiations with the prosecution. The judge looked at Karen, who nodded slowly. The court is in recess for 2 hours. Counsel will meet in my chambers. I stepped down from the witness stand, my legs shaky, and found Hazel waiting. We didn't say anything, just held each other as our mother was led away by her lawyer, and Dr. Shen touched my shoulder gently as she passed. You did well, she said quietly. You told the truth. It was all you had to do. The 2-hour recess stretched to 4. Hazel and I sat in a hallway outside the courtroom drinking terrible coffee from a vending machine and watching lawyers shuttle between the judge's chambers and conference rooms. Rachel popped out once to update us, saying the negotiations were progressing, but were complicated that my mother's emotional breakdown on the stand had changed the dynamic in ways no one had predicted. When we were finally called back into the courtroom, my mother looked diminished somehow, as if her confession had physically shrunk her. She stood beside Mark Shen, her shoulders slumped. A different woman from the one who had given that press conference accusing me of mental illness and lies period. The judge entered, and we all rose. He settled into his chair with the air of someone who had presided over too many family tragedies to be surprised by one more. "We have reached a plea agreement," he announced. "Mrs. Carter, please rise." My mother stood Mark Shen at her side, and I watched her face as the judge read the terms. "You will plead guilty to 1 count of identity theft, 1 count of wire fraud, and 1 count of financial exploitation. In exchange for your plea and cooperation, the prosecution has agreed to recommend a sentence of 5 years in a federal facility, followed by 5 years of supervised probation. You will be required to pay full restitution in the amount of $340,000, representing $250,000 in wedding funds, $60,000 in fraudulent credit card debt, and $30,000 in associated fees and damages. Additionally, you will complete a mandatory financial therapy program to address the behavioral patterns that led to these crimes." Linda's voice was barely a whisper when she said, "I understand, Your Honor." The judge stared at her for a long moment before continuing. "Mrs. Carter, this case represents one of the most profound betrayals of trust I have encountered in my years on the bench. You exploited your daughter's love for personal gain, stealing from them systematically, while claiming every action was motivated by motherly devotion. While this court recognizes you have a history of poverty and hardship in your childhood, that history does not excuse the deliberate and ongoing criminal behavior you have engaged in for more than a decade." He paused. "You have stolen not just money, but trust. You have stolen not just opportunity, but peace of mind. You have stolen your eldest daughter's financial security, and then convinced your youngest that this was somehow an act of love. The damage you have caused will take years to repair, if it can be repaired at all." My mother's shoulders were shaking with silent sobs. "However," the judge continued, "I also note that your daughter, the primary victim, has chosen mercy over revenge. She could have argued for the maximum sentence. She did not. This speaks to her character, not yours, but this court will honor her wishes. The plea agreement is accepted. You will serve your 5 years, and you will use that time to reflect on what you have done and hopefully emerge with some understanding of the difference between sacrifice and theft." The gavel came down, and it was over. The press was waiting outside the courthouse, a wall of cameras and microphones between us and the parking lot. Rachel had advised me not to say anything, but I found myself stopping anyway. Hazel's hand in mine, facing the reporters who had spent weeks debating my sanity and credibility. "I want to say something brief," I told them, and the questions died down as microphones turned toward me. I didn't want revenge. I wanted my life back. I wanted my mother to understand that love doesn't justify theft, that family doesn't mean unlimited access to someone else's financial security, that being the eldest daughter doesn't make you a perpetual ATM. I got justice today. Not perfect justice, but enough to allow me to move forward. And I hope that other people who have experienced familial financial abuse see this and understand that you can set boundaries, you can say no, and you can hold people accountable even when they're family. After that, we pushed our way through the crowd, and by the time we got to Rachel's car, my phone was already buzzing with notifications. The GoFundMe, started by strangers, had received another surge of donations, people moved by the verdict and the statement by the story of an eldest daughter who had finally stopped being everyone's safety net. When I checked that night, an additional $200,000 had been donated with messages attached about healing, rebuilding, and starting over. I sat in my apartment that night, surrounded by silence, trying to process that it was all over. My mother would spend 5 years in prison. I would eventually receive restitution. Though I knew collecting $340,000 from a woman with no assets would be a long battle. Hazel had moved into a friend's place and was starting therapy to unpack 28 years of manipulation. My father was recovering from his stroke in a rehab facility, his secret account with $500,000 finally transferred into my name. The numbers should have felt like a victory. In some ways they did, but mostly I just felt tired and sad and ready to stop thinking about my family's dysfunction for a while. Period. The letter arrived a week later, hand-delivered to my apartment by the postal service. I recognized my mother's handwriting immediately, the careful script she always used for important correspondence. The return address was the Federal Detention Center. I held the envelope for a long time before opening it, wondering what she could possibly have to say now that the trial was over. The sentence handed down, and the consequences finally unavoidable, period. Part of me wanted to throw it away, unread, to refuse her even this small avenue of communication. But another part, the part that had chosen 5 years over 15, needed to know what the truth looked like from her perspective, now that all the lies had been stripped away, and period. I opened the envelope carefully and pulled out 2 handwritten pages that would change everything I thought I understood about forgiveness. The letter began without preamble, my mother's handwriting smaller and less confident than I remembered, as if even her script had been diminished by what she'd done. Natalie, I'm not asking for forgiveness. I know I have no right to it. And I'm not sure I'd believe you if you offered it. But I am asking you to understand something I was never able to explain, perhaps, because I was never able to face it myself until now, sitting in this cell with nothing but time to think about what I've become. I sat at my kitchen table, the pages trembling slightly in my hands. I was 7 when I saw my mother beg for food for the first time. Not ask politely, but actually get on her knees in front of a grocery store manager, crying and pleading for stale bread they were going to throw away anyway. My father had drunk his paycheck again, and we had nothing. I remember the way people looked at her, a mix of pity and disgust, and I remember thinking I would rather die than be that helpless. The next paragraph detailed a childhood I had only heard about in fragments. An alcoholic father who spent money on drink instead of rent evictions every few months. Winters without heat, her mother working 3 jobs and still unable to keep them consistently fed. The kind of poverty that wasn't just about a lack of money, but about the constant, gnawing terror of not knowing if you would have a place to sleep or food to eat from one day to the next. When I got pregnant with you at 23, your father and I were happy poor, but happy. We had plans and dreams and each other. Then he left when you were 8, and suddenly I was my mother. Single, broke, terrified, with 2 little girls depending on me, and no idea how to keep them safe. The fear was so big it felt like it was going to swallow me whole. I remembered those years differently than she described them. Yes, we were poor, but I thought we were getting by. I thought my mother was handling it. Reading her account now, I realized she had hidden the depth of her panic from us performing competence while she was drowning inside. I learned to manipulate people to get what we needed, she wrote, to tell stories that made them want to help, to borrow and delay and redirect. And it worked, Natalie. It kept you and Hazel fed and housed and in school. It gave you opportunities I never had. But somewhere along the line, I stopped being able to tell the difference between what we needed and what I wanted, between survival and greed, between protecting my daughters and stealing from them. The honesty was staggering. No spin, no attempt to minimize what she'd done, just a brutal accounting of how fear had morphed into something else, something darker and more consuming. I was so afraid of poverty returning that I became the thief I feared as a child. I became the person who takes and takes because scarcity taught me there is never enough, that you have to grab what you can when you can, that other people's needs don't matter as much as your own survival. I broke the wrong cycle, Natalie. I should have broken it by loving you harder, by teaching you resilience instead of making you a resource to be exploited. I should have given you the tools to build your own strength instead of stealing your chance to discover it on your own terms. Period. I had to stop reading for a moment, pressing my fingers to my eyes to hold back tears. This was the mother I had needed to hear from years ago, the one who could see clearly what she had done and why it was wrong. But she had only found this clarity now, after everything was destroyed, after all the damage was done, and couldn't be undone, period. I waited 3 weeks before I drove to the federal detention center. Hazel offered to come with me, but I told her this was something I needed to do alone. Some conversations required witnesses. This one required privacy. Period. The facility was 2 hours outside of Boston, a low-slung concrete building surrounded by fences that looked exactly like what it was, a place designed to contain people who had broken society's rules. I went through security, surrendering my phone, my keys, anything that could be considered contraband, and was led to a visiting room partitioned by reinforced glass. My mother was already seated when I arrived. She looked older than she had at the trial. Her hair gone completely grey, without its usual dye, her face bare and stark under the harsh fluorescent lighting. But her eyes were different, somehow clearer, less calculating, period. She picked up the phone on her side of the glass, and I picked up mine. We sat in silence for a full minute, just looking at each other. Two women connected by blood and suffering, trying to figure out what words could possibly bridge 34 years of dysfunction. Period. Finally, she spoke. "You look different. Freer somehow. Like you've lifted a weight." "I have," I said. And I realized as I said it that it was true. Not because you're in here, though, that helps. But because I chose to let go of the anger that was poisoning me. I was carrying it everywhere, letting it color every decision, every relationship. I'm done carrying it around. Linda's eyes filled with tears. I spent my whole life being afraid of being poor again, and in the end I lost everything anyway. My freedom, my daughter's any chance at redemption. The irony is not lost on me. "You haven't lost Hazel," I said. "She's angry and hurt, but she still writes to you. She's working through it in therapy. Whether you two can rebuild anything depends on what you do with these 5 years." "And you?" she asked quietly. "Have I lost you?" I thought about that question, about all the ways she had been losing me piece by piece over the years without realizing it. Every time she stole money and called it love. Every time she manipulated Hazel and called it protection. Every time she chose her fear over her daughter's well-being. "You've lost the version of me that would accept abuse and call it duty," I said. "But I'm here, aren't I? That has to count for something." My mother pressed her hand to the glass, and I noticed how thin it had become, how the orange jumpsuit hung loosely on her frame. "Do you forgive me?" she asked, her voice thick. "I know I have no right to ask, but I need to know if there's any possibility, ever." "I forgive you," I interrupted, and I saw the shock on her face. "Not for you, for me. So I can move on without carrying you in my heart like a wound that never heals. So I can think about my childhood and feel sadness instead of anger. So I can build a life that isn't defined by everything you took from me." She started crying, then fat tears rolling down her face unchecked. "Thank God, Natalie. Thank you. I don't deserve it. I don't deserve any kindness from you after what I've done. Forgiveness isn't about deserving," I said, my own eyes stinging. "It's about deciding that I deserve peace, and I can't have peace while I'm still feeding anger and resentment. So I'm letting it go. Not forgetting what you did, not pretending it didn't hurt me, just releasing the part of it that's been consuming me." Linda wiped her face with her sleeve, trying to compose herself. "I'm in a program here. financial therapy, addiction counseling. Even though money isn't a substance, they're helping me understand the psychology of what I did, the patterns of trauma I inherited and passed on. It doesn't excuse anything, but it helps me see how I got here. Good, I said. Keep doing that work. Figure out who you are when you're not running from a poverty that isn't even chasing you anymore. Maybe when you get out, we can have a different kind of relationship. Not mother and daughter like it was before, but something different. Something built on honesty instead of manipulation. I would love that, she whispered. Even if it takes years, even if you can only stand to see me once a year, I would take that over nothing. I looked at her through the glass, this woman who had given me life, and then spent decades trying to steal it back in small pieces, and I felt something settle inside me. Not quite love, not the uncomplicated affection a daughter is supposed to feel for her mother, but something softer than hate, something closer to compassion for a broken person who had broken others, some was us in her brokenness. I have to go, I said after another minute of silence. I have a long drive back. Will you visit again? I don't know. I answered honestly. Maybe. When I'm ready. But don't wait for me, Mum. Do the work for yourself, not because you think it will bring me back. I need you to understand that our relationship, whatever it becomes, can't be your motivation for healing. You have to want to get better for your own sake. She nodded, understanding, or at least accepting what I was saying. I do love you, Natalie. I know I showed it terribly. I know love is supposed to be different from how I delivered it, but I need you to know it was in there behind all the fear and the theft. It was always there. I know, I said, and I did. That was part of what made it all so complicated, so hard to process. If she had just been evil, it would have been easier. But she was hurt and hurtful, loving and destructive, capable of both motherly devotion and systematic theft. Period. People were complicated. Families were complicated. Forgiveness was complicated. I stood up and she stood up too. We looked at each other one last time through the glass, and then I hung up the phone and walked away. I didn't look back. Didn't wave, just went through the security checkpoints and out into the parking lot, where the spring sunshine felt impossibly bright after the institutional fluorescence inside. Period. I sat in my car for a moment, my hands on the steering wheel, and let myself feel everything, the relief that it was over the grief for what had been lost, the hope for what might still be possible, and underneath it all, a deep, profound peace that came from knowing I had chosen mercy, without weakness, forgiveness, without surrender. I picked up my phone and scrolled to my mother's contact information. Her number, her email, her address. All the ways she had been able to reach me for 34 years. I stared at it for a long moment, and then I hit delete, period. The contact vanished, and with it, the last symbolic link to the version of our relationship that had existed before everything fell apart. If she wanted to contact me now, she would have to go through official channels, the prison mail system, or supervised calls. No more direct access, no more midnight calls about a crisis that required my immediate financial intervention. Period. I started the car and drove away from the detention center, watching it shrink in my rearview mirror until it was gone completely. And for the first time in a long time, I felt like I was driving towards something instead of away. Period. 6 months passed before Hazel showed up at my apartment with an envelope and an expression on her face I'd never seen before. Not the entitled expectation I had grown up with, not the desperate pleading from when the wedding collapsed, but something quieter and more uncertain. Humility, maybe, or just exhaustion from the weight of actually facing what she'd done. "I have something for you," she said when I opened the door. "Can I come in?" I let her in and made coffee while she settled nervously on my couch. the envelope clutched in both hands as if it might escape if she loosened her grip. She looked different too. Thinner. Her hair pulled back in a simple ponytail instead of the elaborate styles she always wore, wearing jeans and a simple sweater that looked like they had come from a thrift store instead of the boutiques my mother had always insisted on. "I've been working," she said when I handed her a mug. "3 part-time jobs, retail restaurant hostess and weekend shifts at a bookstore. It's not glamorous and the hours are terrible, but I've been saving everything I can." She opened the envelope and pulled out a check made out to me for $30,000. "It's what I've managed to save in 6 months." I opened the envelope to find copies of handwritten letters, each one several pages long, each one painfully honest about her role in the family dynamic that had allowed our mother's theft to continue for so long. "Some people wrote back," Hazel continued. "Most didn't. A few told me they never wanted to hear from me again. I don't blame them. I was so focused on being the princess in my own story that I didn't even notice I was standing on your back to reach the crown." We sat in silence for a moment, and I saw something in my sister's face I had been waiting to see for years. Not a performance, not a manipulation designed to get me to forgive her so things could go back to normal. Just a genuine acknowledgement of the harm done and the slow, unglamorous work of trying to become someone different. "My therapist helped me understand something else," she said quietly. "Mum trained me to be helpless. Every time I had a problem, she solved it by taking money from you. Every time I wanted something, she made it appear without me having to work for it. She was building a version of me that would always need her, that would never be strong enough to leave or question or stand on my own." "And now?" I asked. "Now I'm 29, working 3 minimum wage jobs, living with a roommate in a mouse-infested apartment, and learning how to budget for groceries. It's humbling. It's also the first time in my life I've actually earned what I have, period." She looked at me directly. "I can't undo what happened. I can't give you back the years you spent funding my life. But I can become someone you'd be proud to call a sister instead of someone you have to rescue or resent." I put down the check and the letters and looked at my sister. Really looked at the woman who was finally putting in the work to become herself instead of playing the part our mother had written for her. It wasn't forgiveness, not exactly. That would take more time, more sustained change, more proof that this wasn't just another manipulation. But it was the beginning of something. "I'm starting something new," I said, "a foundation using the GoFundMe money and my father's hidden account. Legal aid and support for people who have experienced familial financial abuse. I've been working on it for 3 months. I'm almost ready to launch. I need someone to run operation, handle the day-to-day logistics, coordinate with lawyers and therapists and financial advisors." Hazel's eyes widened slightly. "You're offering me a job. I'm offering you a chance to turn your experience into something that helps other people. It won't pay well, not at first. You'd basically be a volunteer for the first year until we get sustainable funding established. But if you're serious about making amends, about becoming someone different, this is how you do it. Not with apologies and checks, but with sustained action that creates something good out of all the damage." Hazel was silent for a long moment, processing what I was offering. Not reconciliation, not absolution, just the opportunity to prove through years of work that she had truly changed. "Where do we start?" she asked finally. "Period." I smiled, feeling something like hope unfurl in my chest. "Justice for people like us. For the eldest daughters, the scapegoats, and anyone who was taught that family loyalty means accepting financial abuse. We're going to help them set boundaries, file lawsuits if they want to, and understand that saying no to family doesn't make you a bad person." Hazel stood up and held out her hand, formal and serious. "Then I'm in, for as long as it takes, for whatever work you need me to do." I took her hand and shook it, and we stood there in my apartment, sealing a deal that had nothing to do with the sister relationship we were born into, and everything to do with the one we might be able to build from the ruins of what our mother had destroyed. Period. I filed the paperwork to create the Eldest Daughter Project on a Tuesday morning in October, 8 months after my mother's sentencing. The name had come to me during one of my walks through the Boston Common, thinking about all the women who had donated to that GoFundMe, who had shared their stories of being the family bank, the perpetual caregiver, the one who sacrificed while siblings thrived, period. We needed something that spoke directly to that experience that made the invisible work visible. Rachel helped me navigate the non-profit registration process, and Michelle volunteered to handle the financial oversight pro bono for the first year. With the GoFundMe donations and a significant portion of my father's hidden account, we started with just over $700,000 in funding, enough to make a real difference if we used it carefully. Hazel worked 12-hour days getting our systems established. She found office space we could afford in a building that offered a discount on rent for non-profits. She built a database to track cases and connect victims with resources. She interviewed and hired our first staff attorney, a woman named Sarah Chen, who had left a corporate law firm specifically to do advocacy work, period. Watching my sister transform from a pampered golden child into someone who came in early and stayed late, who learned skills she'd never needed before, who attacked every task with the kind of focus she had once only applied to planning her doomed wedding, was its own kind of redemption. Our first case came through a referral from one of the therapists we partnered with, a 35-year-old woman named Jennifer, whose parents had spent her entire college fund, $150,000, that her grandmother had left specifically for her education. They had used the money to fund her younger brother's medical school and her sister's wedding, telling Jennifer that family helps family, and that she was selfish for wanting the money back when her younger siblings needed it more. Period. Sarah took the case, and I watched her work with the same meticulous attention to detail I had brought to my own situation. Documentation timeline. Proof of intent. 6 months later, we won, securing full restitution plus damages. Jennifer cried in our office when Sarah told her, not just because she had her money back, but because someone had finally validated that what happened to her was wrong, period. The media attention from my case had died down, but it reignited when reporters found out what I had done with the aftermath. Articles started appearing with headlines like, "From Wedding Scandal to Advocacy," "Hero Natalie Carter's Second Act," "Turning Trauma into Justice," "How One Woman's Fight Against Family Fraud Became a Movement." I did a few interviews, always stressing that this was no longer about me. It was about the thousands of people who suffered the same exploitation and had no idea they could fight back. Period. Donations surged. Cases poured in. Within 6 months, we had helped 23 families recover stolen funds, provided legal consultations to over 100 others, and established a network of lawyers in 5 states willing to take on familial financial abuse cases at reduced fees. We received another $500,000 in donations from people who saw their own stories reflected in ours and who wanted to support work that finally acknowledged that family doesn't justify theft. Period. Hazel proved her worth 100 times over. She never missed a deadline, never dropped the ball, never slipped back into the entitled, helpless, golden child routine that had defined her for 28 years. After 12 months of volunteer work, I put her on salary as our director of operations. She cried when I told her, not because of the money, which was modest, but because it meant I trusted her enough to make it official, period. We were working late on a Friday night, going through applications for our growing legal fund, when the mail arrived with something that stood out from the usual business envelopes. Thick, cream-coloured, expensive quality cardstock addressed to me personally, period. I opened it to find an elegant card with embossed lettering. A complimentary stay for Ms. Natalie Carter and a guest. 7 nights at the Serenity Maldives Wellness Retreat. We remember where your journey to justice began, and we would be honored to host your return. I'm trying, I said quietly. It's harder than I thought. The worthwhile things usually are. Helen turned to face me. You look different too. The weight in your eyes is gone. You look like someone who has found out where they were running to. We talked for an hour. Helen asked about the foundation, and she nodded with satisfaction as I described the work we were doing. Giving the suffering meaning, she said. It's the only way to get through it. You can't undo what was done to you, but you can make sure it wasn't for nothing. That evening, Hazel and I walked to the end of the resort's longest pier, carrying a small wooden box that had travelled with us from Boston. Our father had passed away 3 months earlier, his heart giving out peacefully in his sleep at the rehab facility. Period. He had lived long enough to see Hazel and me working together, to know his hidden account had helped launch something good, to receive letters from both his daughters that didn't mention anger or blame. Period. We opened the box and took turns scattering his ashes into the water, which was turning gold and pink with the sunset. Hazel cried, and so did I, mourning the father he could have been if he'd been braver, grateful for the father he had tried to become at the end. I'm so sorry I wasn't on your side when it mattered, Hazel said, watching the ashes disperse on the ocean. All those years Mum was stealing from you, and I was just taking and taking without question. I should have seen it. I should have asked. You were a kid then, a young adult, who was deliberately kept in the dark, I said. Mum was good at what she did. She built separate realities for both of us and kept us from comparing notes. You can't blame yourself for being manipulated by an expert. But you figured it out after losing hundreds of thousands of dollars and years of your life. I put my arm around her shoulder. You're here now. That's what matters. You're doing the work, getting better, becoming someone different. That counts for more than you know. We spent the rest of the week doing nothing productive. Swimming, reading, eating meals someone else prepared, talking about things that had nothing to do with our mother, or the foundation, or the past. Hazel told me about a man she'd been seeing, someone she'd met at her bookstore job, who knew nothing about the scandal and liked her for who she was becoming, not who she had been. I told her about the therapy I'd started working through my own patterns of overfunctioning and difficulty accepting help from others. Period. One afternoon, lying on beach chairs as the waves lapped at the shore, Hazel asked me if I had any regrets. I lost $250,000, I said, thinking about the question seriously. I lost years of financial security. I lost the illusion that my family loved me the way I loved them. I lost a mother I will probably never have a normal relationship with. That's a lot of loss. It is. I turned to look at her. But I gained my freedom. I gained the ability to set boundaries and say no without guilt. I gained a foundation that's helping people who thought they were trapped forever. And I gained a sister, not the one I was assigned at birth, but the one you're choosing to become. The one who shows up and does the work and tries to be better. That sister is worth everything I lost. Hazel reached out and took my hand, and we sat there in silence, watching the sun move across the sky. Two sisters who had survived the same storm and were learning to build something new from the wreckage period. On our last night, sitting on the deck of our villa, with the dark, endless ocean below us, I reflected aloud on the strange math of the past year. I paid for a wedding I wasn't invited to. I got the money back through restitution I'll probably spend years collecting. But even if I never see a dime, even if my mother dies in prison with nothing to her name, I still came out ahead because I was set free. And freedom, it turns out, is worth more than any amount of money. My phone buzzed with an email notification, and I almost didn't check, it determined to stay present in this moment of peace. But something made me look. and I saw a subject line that made me sit up straighter. Book Proposal Inquiry. The Eldest Daughter Project. I opened it to find a message from a literary agent at a major publishing house. They had been following the Foundation's work, had seen the media coverage, and wanted to know if I would be interested in writing a book about my experience. Not just the wedding scandal, but the deeper story of familial financial abuse, the psychology of the golden child/scapegoat dynamic, the path from victimization to advocacy. They were offering a substantial advance and promising that 50% of all proceeds would go directly to the Foundation period. I showed the email to Hazel, and she read it with wide eyes. "Are you going to do it?" she asked. I looked out at the ocean, the same view I'd had a year before when I was a completely different person, and I felt something click into place. "Yes," I said. "I think I am." I signed the book contract 3 weeks after returning from the Maldives and spent the next 8 months living inside my own memories. The publisher assigned me an editor named Margaret, who instinctively understood what I was trying to do. Not just tell the story of a wedding disaster, but excavate the decades of conditioning that made that disaster possible, period. We titled it, Paid in Full: Breaking the Cycle of Family Theft. Writing it was harder than I expected. Not the facts, which I had documented extensively, but the emotional archaeology of digging through childhood memories and reinterpreting them through the lens of what I now understood, period. The birthday cake I'd made myself at 10 wasn't just a moment of motherly neglect. It was the first hint of a pattern that would define my entire relationship with my family. The money I'd borrowed at 16 wasn't generosity. It was the beginning of learning that my value was measured by what I could provide, not by who I was. Period. Hazel wrote the foreword. When I read the draft, I had to put it down and walk away for a while. Its unflinching honesty was so raw. "I was the golden child," she wrote. "I didn't know my sister was drowning under the weight of our mother's debts and my own ignorance. I thought gifts and opportunities appeared through some combination of my mother's resourcefulness and Natalie's natural abundance. I never asked where the money came from, because asking would have required acknowledging that something was wrong, and I didn't want anything to be wrong with a life that felt so comfortable." The writing process became its own form of therapy, different from the therapy I was still attending weekly. Putting into words experiences I had minimized for years, seeing patterns emerge across decades, understanding how my mother's trauma had been passed down and transformed into a different kind of damage. I wrote about the psychology of financial abuse, the way families use obligation and guilt as weapons, the specific burden placed on eldest daughters, who were taught that sacrifice was love and boundaries were selfishness. The book was published 14 months after I got that email in the Maldives, and I had no idea what to expect. Margaret had warned me that books about family dysfunction could be unpredictable, that the public was fickle. Period. But 2 weeks after publication, Paid in Full hit the New York Times bestseller list. It stayed there for 6 months. The response was overwhelming, thousands of emails from readers who saw their own families reflected in mine. Women who had been the family bank, the perpetual caregiver, the one who worked 3 jobs, while siblings got funded for college and weddings and down payments. Men who had been parentified as children, forced to raise younger siblings, while parents abused substances or pursued careers or simply checked out. The invisible children who made everyone else's lives possible while their own dreams were indefinitely deferred. I kept my promise and directed 50% of all proceeds to the Eldest Daughter Project. The Foundation's funding tripled, allowing us to expand to 15 states, and hire a full staff of lawyers and therapists. We helped hundreds of families file lawsuits, recover stolen funds, and most importantly, understand that what had happened to them was real abuse, not just an unhappy family dynamic. 3 months after publication, a letter arrived at the Foundation office, forwarded by the publisher who had received it from the prison's return address. My mother's handwriting instantly recognizable, though shakier than I remembered. I opened it alone in my office, not sure what I would find. An attack on the book, a defense of her actions, a demand that I stop profiting from her mistakes. Instead, I found 3 pages of reflection that felt more genuine than anything she had said in court. She had read the book in the prison library, she wrote, and had spent weeks thinking about what I had written. Not defending herself, not making excuses, just sitting with the reality of what she had done as seen through her daughter's eyes. "You broke the cycle the right way," she wrote near the end. "I broke it with theft and manipulation, trying to give my daughters opportunities by stealing them from others. You broke it with truth and boundaries, building something that helps people instead of using them. I am proud of who you've become in spite of me. I am proud that you found a way to turn all that pain into purpose. And I am so sorry I couldn't be the mother who helped you do that, instead of the mother you had to overcome." I folded the letter carefully and placed it in my desk drawer, next to my father's journal and the original wedding contract that had started it all. Proof of where I had come from and how far I had travelled. The email from my publicist came that afternoon, asking if I would be willing to give a keynote speech. A non-profit that worked with family trauma issues wanted me to be the main speaker at their annual conference. 500 people were expected, mostly women who had experienced various forms of familial financial abuse. They were offering a speaking fee that would fund the foundation's operations for 2 months. I stared at the email for a long time, thinking about standing in front of 500 people and telling the story I had spent my entire life trying to hide. The shame and anger and confusion of being used by people who were supposed to love you. The long road from victimization to agency, the choice between revenge and justice, between destruction and healing. Then I thought of all those emails from readers, all those people who had written to say they felt less alone after reading my book, that they finally understood their family's treatment of them was not normal or acceptable, that they had started setting boundaries for the first time in their lives. I replied with a single word. Yes. The conference hall in Chicago held exactly 517 people when I took the stage, and every seat was filled. Women of all ages, some in business suits and some in jeans, some who looked like they had lived comfortable lives, and some whose faces showed the specific weariness that comes from decades of being used. They had come to hear me talk about familial financial abuse, about the invisible work of being the designated caregiver, about the long road from victimization to agency. I stood at the podium and looked out at all those faces, and for a split second I was back in that courtroom, testifying against my own mother. But this time was different. This time, I was choosing to tell the story, not being forced to defend it. I paid $250,000 for a wedding I wasn't invited to. I began, and the room went completely silent. My sister got married in a ceremony I funded but couldn't attend because my family decided I wasn't worthy of a seat. And when that wedding collapsed because I had protected myself with a contract clause, the world watched and debated whether I was a hero or a monster. I told them everything. Not the sanitized book version, but the raw, unvarnished truth of what it felt like to discover your mother had been stealing your identity for years. What it felt like to choose between revenge and justice. What it felt like to forgive someone who never asked for forgiveness and maybe didn't deserve it. Forgiveness is not forgetting, I said. and I saw heads nodding all over the room. My mother is in a federal prison. I remember every theft, every manipulation, every time she chose her fear over my well-being. But I forgave her anyway, not because she deserved it, but because I deserved to stop carrying the weight of her crimes in my heart. I talked about justice, about the difference between punishment and accountability, about how I could have argued for 15 years in prison, but chose 5, because I wanted my mother to face consequences and get help, not just suffer for my satisfaction. Justice is not revenge, I told them. Revenge is making someone hurt as much as they hurt you. Justice is restoring balance and creating accountability. I got justice and it was enough. And then I talked about peace, about the hardest lesson of all. Peace is not silence. For years, I was silent because I thought that's what family loyalty meant. I accepted abuse and called it duty. I sacrificed myself and called it love. But peace, real peace, only came when I learned that I don't owe anyone my silence, not my mother, not my sister, not anyone who tries to tell me that speaking the truth is the same as being cruel. I spoke for 45 minutes, and when I was done, the entire room was on its feet. The applause went on for so long I had to motion for them to stop. Tears streaming down my face, as I looked out at all these women who understood, who had lived their own versions of this story, who had come here looking for permission to set boundaries and claim their own lives. Period. Afterward, dozens of them came up to me telling me stories of parents who stole college funds, siblings who borrowed and never repaid, families who used guilt and obligation as weapons. Some had already filed lawsuits. Others were still trying to find the courage. All of them just needed to know they weren't alone, that they weren't crazy, that they weren't bad people for wanting their families to stop treating them like ATMs. I gave them what I wish someone had given me years ago: validation, permission, and the understanding that love should never cost you everything. Period. 6 months later, I was back in the Maldives by myself. It had become my annual tradition, 1 week a year, where I disconnected from the foundation, from the book promotion, from the constant stream of people needing help, and just existed, period. Hazel understood. She ran the foundation beautifully in my absence, having grown fully into the role I had offered her as a test of her commitment. Period. I was lying on the beach on my last afternoon, my eyes closed, listening to the endless back and forth of the waves, when my phone rang. I kept it on this time, just in case of emergencies. Hazel's name flashed on the screen. "We just settled our 100th case," she said, her voice breathless with excitement. "A woman in Oregon whose brother stole her inheritance. We got it all back, plus damages. Case number 100, Nat, can you believe it?" I smiled, feeling a rush of pride and satisfaction, and the deep contentment that came from knowing we had built something real and lasting. "I can believe it. You've done incredible work." "We've done incredible work," she corrected. "I'm taking the team out to celebrate. I just wished you were here." "I'll be back next week. Celebrate for both of us." If any part of Natalie's journey resonated with you, leave a comment below and share your experience. You don't have to use real names. You don't have to tell the whole story. Just let us know you're out there, because the comment section of this video can become its own kind of support group. A place where the invisible eldest daughters, the forgotten caregivers, and the family ATMs can finally be seen. Period. And here's my question for you. Do you think Natalie made the right choice by offering her mother a 5-year plea deal instead of pushing for the maximum of 15? Some of you may think she was too soft, that her mother deserved every year of that sentence. Others might see it as the ultimate demonstration of power, choosing mercy from a position of strength, instead of crushing someone just because you can. Period. There's no right answer, but I'm genuinely curious to know what you think. Was it justice or weakness? Let me know in the comments if this story moved you, if it made you think differently about family obligations and financial boundaries. Do me a favor and hit that subscribe button. We tell stories like this every week. Real stories about real people who faced impossible choices and found their way through stories about revenge and forgiveness, justice and healing, breaking cycles and building new ones. Period. This channel exists to give a voice to the experiences that don't get talked about enough. The painful family dynamics that happen behind closed doors, while everyone pretends everything is fine. Subscribe so you don't miss the next one. Period. And remember, you don't owe anyone your silence, your money, or yourself. Not even family, especially not family. Thank you for listening to Natalie's story. I'll see you in the next one.